This young man, extremely handsome yet despondent, is our protagonist. Alan used to be a slave, working up to 78 hours a week. Yet now he has been reincarnated into the body of a noble in a fantasy world. Sounds good, right? Well, it is good. However, the character he inhabited is illiterate and has no abilities. Spending every day eating and playing, living uselessly like a count's wayward son. The only thing he doesn't know is where he currently is. Just as Alan was enjoying the attention of the maidservants, a nearby maid reminded him, "You should go to bed early, sir. The young masters will return tomorrow." Alan, surprised, asked the young masters. The maid replied in astonishment, "Masters Leo and Tun. You speak as if you've never heard of the Palio family." At the mention of that name, Alan immediately froze. The Palacio family, the name struck terror in him. It felt disturbingly familiar. The maids looked at him with concern. Master Alun pressed his face into his hands, uneasy. Could this be Seiki Delir? Alan remembered the title of a game he once played. The game he used to play during the rare moments of free time, when he was still an office slave. It was a turn-based RPG. No matter which storyline the player started with, once the 5 great sins appeared, wrath, greed, sloth, pride, obsession, the kingdom, the noble houses, and the cities would begin to collapse disastrously. Among them, the Palacio Count family stood out. They were a decadent noble family that appeared in a side quest before the main plot began. Alan sank to his knees in despair. Right, I know this place well. He ransacked his memory, searching for information about that family. Alan looked at the magnificent mansion before him in despair. Really, why is it the Palio Count family? That is the first to be destroyed by the 5 great sins. Please, I'd rather go back to being a slave working 78 hours a week. Living in luxury without meaning, only for everything to fall in 10 years, feels worse than being owed half a year's wages. Why does someone like me, who transmigrated, have no privileges at all? Wait, privileges? Right, knowing the game's plot 10 years in advance also means I know the future, doesn't it? If so, I just need to remove the causes that lead to destruction wind before they happen. And so, to enjoy a peaceful, noble life, he decided to reform the 5 great sins. He told himself they are probably still children, maybe there's still a chance to save them. 2 months later in his study, receiving a report, I rescued orphaned children in the East, specifically victims turned into living test subjects. Among them, I assigned the task of running the orphanage to a girl named Dutia. Alan beamed, eyes lighting up. Indeed, my judgment was right. You truly are a very capable person. Evan replied, yes, sir. But that was a compliment, right? Because the young master never shows emotion on his face. He nodded, confirming. Then, Evan, I expect you to assist me more from now on. Evan stammered, this will be hard to get used to. Looking at his face in the mirror, Alan thought, this face used to be very expressive, but it seems only the facial skin didn't fully merge with the soul. Evan is a rare supporting character in the game, a loyal man, so I recruited him. Evan said, anyway, thank you for the compliment, young master. But this time you said the raid was to rescue a girl named Dutia, right? Alan answered, yes. Evan continued, I must admit I now understand why you chose that girl. Even with my seasoned eyes, having roamed the mercenary world for years, that girl is anything but ordinary. He recalled the scene when he entered the jail to rescue the children, and Evan was astonished. She was so strong I couldn't fathom why she meekly allowed herself to be imprisoned like that. Why didn't you bring her back here? Wouldn't that be a loss for you? Alan agreed, an accurate observation. He pondered, on the surface it looks like I'm wasting a source of power by not using it, but leaving things as they are is also part of the plan. Dutia is of the bloodline race and has formed a pact with an indescribable entity from another realm, possessing unfathomable power, and will later become Wrath, one of the 5 great sins that cause hundreds of deaths. But if she is raised in a peaceful environment, she surely won't tread the path of ruin. That means I've defused the first ticking time bomb. Now I need to think of a reason not to bring her back. Alan spoke up, yes, that's right. He propped his hand and stressed, because the time isn't right yet. Evan exclaimed in surprise, the time isn't right yet. Alan nodded, exactly. Make sure nothing about this leaks out and provide the girl with everything she needs. He accepted the order, understood. Suddenly he took out an item, oh, and send this to Dutia. Evan asked, a letter, is it important? Alan replied, it's just a letter of concern. The girl went through something horrific like human experimentation, so I thought sending a bit of comfort to help calm her would be better. He accepted it. You even wrote a letter like this, sir. I'll deliver it carefully. After that, he stood by the window and watched Evan ride off on horseback. Alan, uneasy, I wonder if it will really be comforting. The true content hidden in that letter of concern was something he'd heard dozens of times while playing the game. It was a spell used to befriend the bloodline race and had a calming effect. Sin of wrath, be at peace. The grief of darkness, the thoughtlessness of light, one ambition, one belonging, these were all incantations that appeared in the Wrath storyline. But by then, she had already fallen completely into darkness. Cold and unfeeling, it was already too late. In the game, after failing, it would transition into a battle. But now everything is still set 10 years earlier, so perhaps it's not too late yet. Alan stretched and lamented, one of the 5 doom flags has been diffused. Is it time for the next one? Thinking that a single spell could win over a monster is honestly laughable. But then again, since that race worships entities from beyond, it might actually work. Those at the extreme end of fanaticism have mindsets that are hard to grasp. Elsewhere, Dutia held the letter in silence. Evan was startled. Magical power was still emanating from the girl, utterly unreasonable. Yet she carried a strange air, as if she had no emotions at all. She spoke. The one who sent this letter was Lord Allen, wasn't it? Why didn't he summon me to his side? He panicked inwardly. What the hell is that? Evan stammered that. He looked at Dutia. Mana manifesting in visible form can only happen at a master level. He recalled your words. Because the time isn't right. Evan hurriedly said, oh right, it's because it's not the right moment. She then withdrew her killing intent. The letter's contents, remember this, the grief of darkness, the thoughtlessness of light will gradually fade. Dutia was moved. That was surely a promise only her master would know. All right, I roughly understand. He was terrified, sweat running down his body from vigilance. She smiled eerily, I will obey his will. As for you, lying in bed, Alan thought, today has been truly satisfying. Even the bright moon seems to cheer me on. I must strive for the next round. On this side, a pile of books fell from the shelf onto Alan's head. He squatted on the floor and sighed. There's nothing here either. Hunting for clues about the third threat gives me a headache. Evan ran over and said, young master, we've rescued the second child you mentioned. Now he had a bump on his head. He said, really? You made sure to treat the child well, right? He answered, of course, sir. After that child left the illegal slave market. Suddenly, the door was kicked open. A brutish guy entered and said, isn't this the place? This man was the second young master of the Palacio Count family. Cons, yo, he nudged him and said, how does an illiterate like you have a book? Oh right, I heard you've been studying lately. He glared, your brother's gone right. Alan thought to himself, he's always such a nuisance. How did I put up with this before? I wanted to resist, but I immediately acted obedient, bowed my head and said, it seems you still want to use the library, so I'll take my leave first. Tony Yo gleefully stepped on his head. You know your place, huh? Suddenly, a knife flew across his body. Looking closely, the knife was embedded in the wall. At that moment, someone entered from afar and said coldly, you insects are too noisy. Tun Yo felt extremely annoyed. The eldest young master stepped forward, pointed at them, and said sternly, I don't want to see blood first thing in the morning, so leave. This man was the eldest young master of the Palacio Counts, Leo Paulo. Immediately, the two of them charged at each other. Brother, I told you to drop that rude attitude when entering the library. Leo replied, get out while you still can. Alon quietly slipped away on this side. The Palace IO territory had disappeared from the game quickly. Alon recalled his mission, investigate the Palace IO domain of the Air Kingdom. It was a place of many vices led by an organization called Avalon, but their power was greater than he expected. Essentially, these rotten brothers were fighting for the position of family head. One was a big figure in the underworld, the other ran a large illegal drug enterprise. Alan thought to himself that for the sake of his life he couldn't confront these two. So he and Evan silently let the two beat each other up and quietly slipped out. Inside the library, fierce fighting raged non-stop, objects flying everywhere. Evan adjusted his hair for him. Alan thought to himself that he'd live happily as the weak, illegitimate, incompetent son. After that he returned to his room, letting out a weary cry. Still, the second child was not ordinary. Alan was relaxing when he turned to look at him in puzzlement. Evan wondered, how does someone like this know about the illegal slave market and the secret biological experiments happening in other regions? How on earth? Over there he yawned lazily, seeming to have trouble controlling himself. Still lying in bed complaining, I'm so tired. Evan suddenly spoke, young master, you really are strange. You sent that child to the orphanage. Alan didn't look at him, he wondered, is he saying that child isn't ordinary? That boy is not merely ordinary but possesses a destructive level. Within an allied empire formed from many nations, the center is the kingdom of Kalian. The child we rescued from the illegal slave market is the second reincarnation of Seiki Zeusmon. After being sold into slavery and abused, shuffled from place to place, he became the embodiment of one of the 5 great sins, sloth. He transformed like a demon, and then destroyed nations in the most horrifying ways imaginable. At this stage of the storyline, many players were shocked by the game's brutality. Contrary to the title's sloth, he was actually extremely industrious and would repay both kindness and hatred many times over. That's why I emphasized to Evan to treat G very kindly. He trembled, holding his teacup, and murmured, it's all so vivid. Alan calmly said, the reason I sent him to the orphanage is because the time isn't right. Evan replied, I suspected as much. So the letter you sent Dutia was about the second child. Alan recalled the letter and answered, yes, and it also included some casual chit-chat. I told the girl to take care of the somewhat frail child I sent. The boy's figure there looked so lonely, his whole body covered in wounds. At that moment, a pair of small feet approached. A voice rang out from behind G, you're broken. The voice remained calm, it was the trace of that thing. His hand moved slightly. Dutia appeared before G touched him and asked, you're the Black Sun, right? She smiled and added, yet the Great Moon still chose you, congratulations. Dutia flashed a witch-like, malevolent smile as powerful magic radiated from her. So feel the bestowed power and let your potential be unleashed. She reached out toward G, smiling. If you remain loyal and follow his orders, you will be avenged. At that moment, strands of magic slowly emanated from his back. Dutia smiled and looked up at the letter. Now I should send my first reply. Under the moonlight, Alon's written lines appeared. She wanted to send him a gentle greeting. At the Count's manor where they lived, Evan opened the door and entered. Alan was still muttering, "Where is the third person after all?" He suddenly said, "Big trouble, sir." Evan continued, "That scumbag." "No, I mean the second young master." Alan heard that and raised his head. "What? Are you saying that guy is dead?" The second young master's death happened unexpectedly. He wondered really. Afterwards, everyone gathered at the venue for the second young master's funeral. Two beautiful girls stood on either side of Count Balatyo, cooing master. The other complained, "When will this end? I'm bored." The one beside her piped up, "I'm hungry." Alan was left speechless, bringing drugs and women to your son's funeral. This family is truly rotten, the very type of decadent fantasy. Alan looked down at his brother. After all, Tunai dying from an accidental fall was different from what he remembered. In the game, the man beside him was the murderer. In the end, he wailed pathetically, "Finally, I killed that vermin after 50 years. Now I'm the legitimate heir, I am Count Paula." He cried and yet looked ecstatic, as if this were a marvelous opportunity. Alan glanced over helplessly, "At least hide your emotion." The mastermind was surely Leo or his lackeys. Anyway, he only needed to deal with the 5 great sins. Time shifted to 1 year later. The heir issue had been settled. Leo consolidated the drug trade. The Count's domain became noticeably more peaceful. At that time, Alon and Evan sat facing each other. He was still eating while thinking about the stack of papers before him. Meanwhile, Dutia and he had become pen pals. If he kept in touch with her, it would be useful in the future. In the letter, Dutia began to tell him, "Why Yunar is very good at hide-and-seek, Hai is excellent at fighting. Zeus is growing normally and the boy likes puppetry." Alan read and smiled softly. The children all seemed well behaved. At the bottom was this month's list of patrons. When Alon saw it, he exclaimed, "The list has increased again. It's interesting that more patrons keep appearing for that little orphanage." Evan also remarked that though it's a bit odd, it's good nonetheless. "Oh right, about what you've been searching for," Evan said. "I received a call from the Information Guild saying they found a lead." Hearing that, he ate and said, "Really? What a relief. It's surely a list about the third kingpin. Finally, I can find him." At that moment, light from the window brightened the room. The two fell silent, each absorbed in their own task. Elsewhere, a piercing scream rang out. It was the maggot drug distribution point. The two walked and chatted. "The Pala-io family's fish is generous. He always gives us generous rewards." The other replied, "Yes, our organization now has a few hundred members." Before them were people who had just been killed almost instantly. Seeing the scene before them, they panicked and cried out miserably, "Sir, my hand's out of control, help." Immediately after, a horrifying event occurred. Everyone there simultaneously took their own lives. The screams echoed. Nearby, a lone figure stood silently in the shadows. Dutia appeared behind them and said, "I really enjoyed today's puppet show. Seems there's a lot to report." Dutia appeared behind them and said, "I really enjoyed today's puppet show. Seems there's a lot to report." Dutia turned and asked, "So do you pity them?" Jisoo replied, "Because they used others to make drugs. I just don't know if this has anything to do with my grudge." She answered, "Of course it's useful. We're creating space for his return." Dutia gave a wicked smile. "How could we allow this place to look shabby when he returns?" Gyatso heard this and expressionlessly replied, "Understood." Immediately after, the two activated their magic. Whirling winds rose and they vanished. Like ghosts hovering in the night, everything would unfold according to his will. A light flashed brilliantly in the night. Under the peaceful crescent moon, Dutia's voice rang out, "We Lam and Gaiat will be his sword." No one remained there, only a deep hole in the ground. 2 years had passed since becoming pen pals with Dutia. Evan dragged his tired body toward the backyard. "I'm back, so you were in the backyard." Alan said nonchalantly, "Oh my Evan, you startled me." He gestured and said, "The fifth child has been safely sent to the orphanage." Alan was extremely astonished to hear that. In the meantime, the other 3 sins had all been saved. He handed food to Evan. "Here, eat." "Yes, thank you, sir." While giving Evan the food, Alan thought about how to find the third one. Greed was a bit difficult, but with a player's knowledge, after squeezing Evan to the bone, everything finally went smoothly. After handing over the food, he said, "You did very well running around like that. Now you can rest a bit." Evan asked, "Is the orphanage mission finished?" Alan replied casually, "Yes, it's done, thank goodness." Evan lay down and sighed, asking again, "But young master, aren't you happy?" "Of course," Alan answered. He said, "You don't look very pleased." He pointed at his mouth, "I'm smiling now." Then he put on an utterly mechanical smile, let's just say that. Sunlight shone down as he stretched and breathed in. Alan lay on the grass, musing, "This is progressing better than I thought. Everything is going smoothly." The masters of the familiars all became the 5 great sins after a past tragedy. Although this is said in their past, before they awakened into sins, the chance to rescue them all perfectly before the tragedy occurred was very slim. Rescuing them after they had already become sins would be even more worrisome. At that point he asked, "How's the orphanage?" Evan produced the letter. Everything was as usual. Everything was going smoothly. Evan continued, "The children at first were like broken dolls." He said they had brightened up a little. Alan opened the letter. "Really? Then we won't need any more nannies." He thought he hadn't expected Dutia to do so well. Perhaps because her character setup is tied to the moon orphanage. She certainly hates interference. Alan called Evan over. "When you see it this way, Dutia is also a good child. So is there anything special about them?" In the letter, Dutia wrote, "Everyone is well. Some children here are growing very beautiful. You really don't need to worry about the orders anymore, nor about the children you just sent." After reading the letter, Alan was truly glad to see that everyone was being raised properly. He thought that if all 5 sins grew up normally, environment really matters. Evan asked, "So when do you plan to meet the children? You always say you'll find time for that." Alan hesitated. outwardly appearing reluctant, but in fact he had no intention of meeting them directly. It would be beneficial in many ways to be closer to them. But perhaps because the process of becoming a sin is so terrible and tragic, their personalities as seen in the game's flashbacks were awful from childhood. He considered carefully. Since he did rescue them before awakening, it should be better, but it still felt frightening. He stammered, maybe next year is fine, I understand. Alan breathed a sigh of relief. After all, from now on in this terribly dark fantasy world, what he needed was some self-defense skills. He thought magic required talent, and he happened to have it. Evan spoke up, but young master, have you heard of Lam and Guyot? Alan answered, never heard of them. Evan explained, they are an organization that has recently become famous, specializing in hunting criminal organizations. Alan asked again, like cleaning up trash, sounds like a good thing. But inwardly he thought this wasn't part of the setup he knew, so they'd probably disappear soon. Evan said seriously, but now they even kill nobles, which is why I thought you should know about them. Alan called to him, Evan, from today you will sleep next to my room. Night was drawing on. Moonlight lit the entire mansion as voices rose. Now let's hear the weekly report on Lam and Guyot's activities, shall we? Du Tia nodded and spoke softly. In the north, Zio Lang cheerfully said he had taken care of everything. He said calmly, the heads of the slave traders have been dealt with. I love this outfit, Lucky Stitch, he added, telling them that if anyone guessed my eye color they'd live, but no one knew. Din also spoke up, all the bodies have been buried properly. Ratmu sat on the steps and said, the south is finished too. The illegal human laboratories and the troublesome Avalon were torn apart, leaving no trace. Du Tia grinned wickedly. Good, everything is unfolding according to his will. We exist for the glory of the Great Moon. They are all members of the secret Lam and Guyot organization, worshippers of the Great Moon. However, a problem has arisen. Du Tia said under his guidance everything should be perfect, how can there be a problem? Ratmu said that Avalon's leader is the Count's eldest son. During the Southern Purge, a dangerous document was uncovered. It seems the Count's eldest is plotting against him. This surprised Du Tia, but she showed little outward reaction. What? A sinister power radiated from her entire being. Indeed, even those nearby felt terror-stricken by it. She held the paper in her hand. After the Count fell ill and died, he was secretly eliminated with poison. She crushed the paper in anger. Truly, you're right. 2 years later, as predicted, Count Ballet passed away. The official cause was announced as cardiac arrest, but given the drug abuse leading to death, it was obvious. A voice asked, what, Lam and Guyot again? Alan listened quietly. Yes, they assassinated him at night, another assassination. Alan thought they seemed to be getting more cautious about Lam and Guyot. Moreover, the Count's funeral had no mourners. It ended in utter silence. Everyone left coldly. Evan asked, young master, what should we do? Next year the commoner, meaning the eldest son, will inherit the title. What's with all this luggage? Alan was packing, you pack up too. Evan was taken aback. Leave. Are you going to leave the mansion? Alan replied, not exactly, we're heading south. After tidying up, Evan wondered, south, you mean Jayat me, right? They plan to move to a small village in the southern part of the Kayi territory, called Yaam. Meanwhile, someone stood upstairs watching his every move. Leo had observed from start to finish but said nothing. The delicious fried eggs and bread in the had them happily frying eggs until they were mouth-watering. But that happy life did not last long. After 3 days, the two had to return to the Count's mansion. Alan tore at his hair and complained, now what? Another funeral for the eldest son. He said gloomily, I can't believe I have to return to this blood-soaked place. The signs of death this time are very different. How did he end up dead? Alan looked at Leo lying in the coffin. The cause of death was a sword thrust to the heart. Alan thought, who could do this? Who killed Leo? At that moment, Leo turned to ask about the cause of death. The guards were immediately terrified, their hearts jolting in fear. Sorry for staring at you. Alan was also stunned, not understanding what had suddenly come over them. He silently passed through the crowd. Evan followed and called, young master. He asked quietly, Evan, have you found anything? Yes, about that. Young master, could it be? Evan whispered, are you the one who wiped out Avalon in a single night? Hearing that, Alan turned to look at the servants milling about, seeing only their confused expressions. A few days earlier, on the trip to Jayat Miu, Evan said, by the way, young master, if you're leaving, why not choose a better city? Alan thought to himself, no, absolutely not. Jayat Miu is the final location in my plan. You have rescued the 5 great sins from their circumstances and prevented the world's future destruction. Jayat Miu has no ties to the original storyline, and it also has a tattoo. A perfect place to live comfortably like a noble, enjoying a sweet life. Alan said in a low voice, there's a reason for everything. Evan immediately interrupted, I'm not going to be fooled anymore. You always ignore things when you're preoccupied. Alan clicked his tongue, just consider it that way. The carriage rolled out of the Count's mansion. Leo had witnessed it all, wondering in his mind whether he should kill him. After all, his presence here was useless. Leo had considered eliminating him with poison after his father's death, but then thought that since he had quietly moved toward the border, there was no longer a reason to kill him. Thinking that, he told himself that because Avalon's affairs had been going poorly lately, he was merely a nuisance. Leo gripped the railing tightly, still lingering on something. Then he ordered his valet Ao Man to follow the carriage. Ao Man, Leo's right-hand man, asked, so you mean you want me to kill him? Leo was taken aback by the question, what? But Ao Man coldly followed the order without complaint. Suddenly he asked, which annoyed Leo, Your mission is to obey me. No sooner had he said that than Leo was stabbed in the chest with a sword. His voice trembling, you, how dare you betray me? The other said, I've had enough of enjoying this civil war. But the person was not our man, it was Hyan, a member of Lam and Guyot, not our man. So far we've been taught by Hyatt and Guyot. Lam and Guyot is his sword, we act according to his will. But if anyone dares harm the great moon, we will act on our own. Saying that, he drove the blade deeper into Leo, then decisively pulled the sword out. Blood splattered all over the floor. He watched Leo collapse and continued, that's why I've been waiting for you to say those words all this time. I didn't expect it would take 2 years. Keep threatening, my people won't let you leave safely. With what you just said, Avalon will now vanish from the continent forever. He showed a hint of regret, what a pity. The great moon gave you a chance. Having said that, he leapt over the balcony and disappeared. Dawn began to break. The sun rose as usual, and Giant Miu truly was a paradise. Alan woke up cheerfully, good morning. He took in the view of another peaceful day, eating whenever he wished and enjoying the foods he liked. Finally, he could enjoy the life of a true noble. While eating, he thought, maybe I should start a bakery. Evan entered with a letter in hand. Young master, there's a letter for you. Taking it, Alan wondered, what's this? The piece of bread in his hand fell onto the table. The letter stated that after Leo's death, Palace IO requested his return, and the free days in paradise ended after just 3 days. So Alan sadly stood before his brother's funeral and returned to the mansion once more. Seeing the fearful people before him, he wondered why everyone was reacting that way. Evan said, young master, since when have you been the mastermind behind wiping out Avalon? Alan was also baffled by the question. Looking back, he had fallen into a continuous simulation, full of insane situations. Alan sat curled up in a corner, sorrowful. Hey, Duong Dung, can you explain to me in a way I can understand why I became the mastermind? Evan replied calmly, because you were the only one left alive after this. Leo was murdered right after we left the mansion, giving you a perfect alibi and making you the heir. Hearing this, Alan froze, realizing the problem. Evan continued, Avalon disappeared. There was no one left to complicate Leo's death. And so you became the mastermind of the case with a master swordsman under your command. Happy now, what's with that outfit? Alan thought, my god, when did I start all this? No organization could erase a global underworld boss so quickly. Alan asked, didn't you say there was an organization that hunts other organizations? You mean Lam and Guyot? That's right, but you think that's the case. Evan said the intelligence network reported otherwise. They said Lam and Guyot leaves no bodies, only a sign. While Avalon's members were all killed by swords, looking like a scene of hell on earth. That's why I'm considered the mastermind with a master swordsman beneath me. Indeed, Lam and Guyot doesn't appear in the game. No weak organization would vanish before the main plot begins. So who was it? Dutia here interrogated, are there any traces? Dutia asked again, any traces? Xiao Lang also spoke up, me too. He laughed gleefully, it's all corpses over there. The door opened, and a familiar voice rang out, we're here. The people from Giant Miu also arrived. Avalon's remaining force numbered 486. Giant Miu spoke up exactly as the boss intended. He laughed and said, we cut them in half. After hearing everyone's report, Dutia was extremely pleased, perfect, excellent. And so, Avalon, the colossal organization that once dominated the kingdom of Taya, was reduced to dust in just 5 days. Giant Miu interjected, however it seems the cleanup isn't finished. What do you mean? He held up a stack of documents. I found more nobles linked to Avalon. The Duchy of Aer appears to be deeply involved. After hearing this, Dutia fell silent for a moment. She opened the file Giant Miu handed her, radiating her usual menace. You know what I'm about to say, right? Everyone understood her meaning, no one added anything. Giant Miu said, let's deal with them quietly. Dutia exhaled, then turned to Jin. The Intelligence Council has confirmed everything right. Jin held the paper. Yes, they're treating this case as unrelated to Lam and Guyot. Ji beside him added, other guilds say the same, they call it a hell created by swordsmen. Dutia asked, do we continue surveillance? She smiled slightly, continue, but absolutely do not touch that person. I've said it countless times, everyone knows, right? He manipulated the papers to float, but because that person's bloodline has already targeted this before, this case is not in order. Remember, we are a sword. On hearing this, Dutia showed excitement, covered her face and said, a sword must not think for itself, right? Her eyes flashed red. Facing the window, she said, Lam and Guyot must act on command, remember, this person knows everything. The 4 others also looked up tensely. Her voice was resolute, never disappoint that person. Jiotso looked at Dutia, puzzled. I don't get it, Dutia is so superior, yet she's anxious and restless just because they've been discovered. Then he raised the stack of papers and said, I understand now, it's all for the great moon. For that person, at this moment in the Count's manor, the lights were still on inside. Alan sat at his desk lamenting, I can't take it anymore. He looked up, tears streaming down his face. After the funeral, he'd been incredibly busy for a month. Alan complained, I just want to relax and live off money, that's what a noble should do. He bowed his head thinking, although I've caused much hatred and Leo's death was supposed to happen 6 years later, because of my brother's death the game's timeline changed and all family duties fell to me. At that moment the heir suddenly heard a call, young Count the elders please enter at once. Each held a pile of items in their hands. Books or scrolls? Seeing this, he sighed even more. Dark circles showed under Alan's eyes. He wondered why everyone worked so hard. When the Count was alive, they were leisurely, even lazy. From afar, the elders saw his sullen face and waved in panic. Is he angry? We must work harder, we don't want to die. His complexion grew paler from overwork. The vassals must be working diligently because of rumors that he's the mastermind. I told you to come, why didn't you? Now Alan is a small company slave, working silently. In his heart, he wished they would handle everything themselves. Cut to a scene where the flames flare up and gradually roast the food. Evan looked puzzled and asked the young master, I have to say, I'm really surprised. Alan was now manipulating magic to float around the room. Evan continued, to reach rank 2 in just 2 years of self-study, your talent is truly exceptional. When did you develop like this? Normally, it takes about 4 years to reach rank 2 and magic is still unusable unless you were born with Shupu. He replied calmly, I must have some talent, because I was worried I trained hard to defend myself. Alan thought to himself that this technique also requires very precise mana control. He kept the spells flying continuously around him, but the important thing was that they were still incomplete. Fatigue showed on his face. He never imagined he'd actually use magic in a fantasy world. He murmured, at first I was very excited and thought that once the plan was complete it would no longer be dangerous. So I would slow down my studies. Then the magic orb rose, but recently survival itself has become a real issue. He realized a painful truth that brought tears to his eyes. His mana well was extremely small. Alan complained that nothing was effective. At this point, he recalled the information about it. The mana well a person is born with is like an athlete's body type, fixed from birth. His mana well was so tiny that thinking about it caused him intense pain. He realized the truth. It was so small that training couldn't help. Sitting and eating while thinking that if all else failed, there was one other way. Evan picked up the letter and said, Ah yes, an invitation to a dance has arrived for the young master. Hearing that, he turned to look toward the dance. At that moment the dance had arrived, held at a luxurious house. Around them the nobles had all gathered. He wore his count's attire and entered with Evan. Upon entering he sighed, Phew, I'm tired already. This was just a typical ball for networking among nobles, held in the southern region of the kingdom Atea. Since he'll soon become a count, he should probably use this opportunity to forge a few connections. Alan straightened the scarf at his neck and went in. Evan, stuffing a pile of food, asked, What are you doing? He thought to himself that befriending nobles was important for his future peace. But as Alan approached, everyone around was frightened by his demeanor and hurriedly avoided him. Then he reached out to greet a nearby man, who immediately panicked, and the crowd scattered as if chased by a ghost. Evan beside him couldn't help but laugh and console, Don't be like that, haha, don't be upset. He watched and thought, upset, not really. I expected this, so he said, Evan, I'm leaving. With that he turned away. I know I'll be ignored because my dignity isn't like that of our illustrious ancestors. Now I'm just the black sheep of the East. But he didn't come unprepared. Alan lifted his wineglass, thinking he would handle the situation with the social skills he'd secretly practiced. He said, The flavor of this wine is quite distinctive. A nearby girl turned at his words but grew very frightened. He continued in a low voice, Especially the aroma seems different. Alan smiled faintly, looking like a demon. I'd like to drink a few bottles at home. But inwardly he meant it as a gentle smile, a necessary social gesture. The girl on the other side paled and trembled, then fled in panic. I'll talk to my father and prepare it immediately. Alan watched in confusion, thinking, wait, no. Those behind whispered about Alan. He threatened her to get a limited edition bottle. Worse than his brothers, he's more of a rogue. Evan next to him couldn't help but pat his shoulder to suppress a laugh. He still tried to deny reality. She must be a shy type. After that, they left. Evan said, Your spoils have increased again. He munched happily while listing an impressive inventory. A fine horse from Bandian Fenian orange tea, metal crafted by Villander Malantin specialty wine. Truly an impressive list. Meanwhile, the protagonist was still mired in painful thoughts. Turns out the name Paula's IO is more notorious than he thought. Rumors say you killed your worthless brothers. You seem to have become someone everyone avoids. Goodbye socializing then. Am I the only one who sees this, or have I become more distant from others? He said wearily. I'll go get some fresh air. Evan stood still and said yes. At the back, a red-haired girl quietly watched him. She looked at him as if deep in thought, then stepped outside and leaned on the railing to look out. He kept wondering where did it go wrong. Just then a voice called out, Hello, may I speak with you for a moment? Alan was startled and turned. Someone spoke to me, who is it? But when he turned, there was no one to be seen. And suddenly a voice sounded again. He looked down in surprise. A petite girl had appeared before him. She introduced herself. Loja, the third daughter of Duke Intia. At the name he murmured, Intia of course. Alan said yes, hello. The Intia family is one of the 3 great villains of the region, the black sheep of the north. Alan thought to himself that anyone WHO Chinese letter speaks to him is not ordinary. He looked at the little girl and wondered, why don't I remember her? He didn't think he'd seen her in the game. Leah suddenly spoke up, I'll be blunt. Lend me your strength. At this, Alan's expression before her grew frightening and gloomy. Logia, flustered, continued, I'll be assassinated soon. Her words echoed in the darkness, strangely gentle. Leah's face was full of terror as she looked up. Alan thought to himself that he had received his father's affection and had always been protected like a favored child. Duke Intia had fallen gravely ill. She said in panic, but now, Intia hesitated and continued, My half-sisters are about to kill me. He wondered, so it was all just a survival struggle. Alan looked down and understood, no wonder I don't remember her. Because she died when the game began. Leah pleaded urgently, if it's your power, Alan, please. But he answered, I refuse. Leah still tried to continue, I'm not asking you to help me for free. If you help me, I'll give you half of the Ntia family. But he had already turned away, saying, then I'll take my leave. Alan thought inwardly that although pitiful, merely keeping his own life was difficult enough. He shouldn't invite more trouble, even if he wanted to help it wouldn't be as rumored. He had no special abilities at all. Alan couldn't help but look back at the solitary figure standing there. Leah's face was sad and silent. He rubbed his neck, exhaled, then turned back, thinking to himself, something good will happen to her soon. Hopefully she'll find a good ally. Then he re-entered the party, where two figures in black cloaks were talking in the corner. So Ntia has drawn close to the great moon. I should let H letter 183 and GUY letter 1EC7T know that something good is coming for them. The woman beside him said, you don't need to. If the information is correct, she's the only one in the Ntia house not tied to Avalon. They above were watching Logia, which means she's not a target of Jot Mu. The other turned away, that's fine then. All the other Ntias will be dealt with eventually. Yes, under H letter 183 and GUY letter 1EC7TS orders. We will focus on cutting off the information so the Avalon incident never reaches him. They above silently observed Alan below. At the party he inwardly sighed, the place feels so empty. Could I be surrounded by some kind of barrier? Alan didn't notice a mysterious girl nearby. She spoke, hello. Alan, moved that someone had spoken to him, thought, was that directed at me? Really? Could I actually befriend a noble this time? He turned and said, yes, hello. The girl held a fan to her mouth and smiled faintly. Seeing this, he immediately resolved, again, another shady one, I've seen this face in the game. Seeing her, he thought, anyone who initiates conversation with me first is certainly not an ordinary noble. Recognizing her, he stepped forward, hello, Miss Genonia. Seeing him recognize her, Kea exclaimed, oh my, you know me. He replied calmly, of course you're quite famous. The three most notorious villain clans of the Ea kingdom. To the north is the Ntia house, to the east is the Palas house, and finally to the west is the debauchery district. She evoked the image of a noble serpent. Kea smiled softly, famous me, I am the eldest daughter of Count Zenonia. Count Zenonia, if Balas IO is a criminal gang, Zenonia is the upscale version of Zir. A legalized mafia corporation. Thinking this, Alan shivered. I only need a few noble connections to live in peace, he resolved inwardly. Even with half my life hanging by a thread, for this sweet life I must not get involved with them. Someone teased her about Kea's beauty. She replied gently, thank you for the compliment, sir. Kea smiled and continued, I'd like to talk more, what do you think? Alan answered calmly, I would like that too, but there are too many eyes watching. Inwardly he prayed, please let me leave quietly. Kea looked at him and said something puzzling, just like the rumors. Then she turned and said, I hope to see you again soon. The line sounded cryptic, then Kea turned away to another spot. He stood there dazed, not understanding what had just happened. Above, the two observers watching from above said, Avalon district is completely sealed off. The other added, but now a new person has appeared. They looked toward the window where a figure hiding in a tree was still watching. A tail. Then two small figures darted off quickly. Without a direct order, they only observed for now and would act if needed. Scene change, Evan scratched his head in confusion. Young master, are you sure this time it's real? They stood before a mountain pass. Evan doubted, is this the gorge we've been searching for all this time? He peered inside, though it was daytime, the place was unusually dark, everyone's faces tense as if about to ascend. He clenched his fists, finally found it. His true target, the environmental effects match, this is definitely the place. Evan sighed, if this turns out to be fake again, I'll be depressed. They entered while surveying the area. There were inscriptions on the stone slabs, he replied, this time it's the real thing. In the game, this place was much easier to find. Actually, the reason he had come all this way under the pretense of a reconnaissance mission was because of the labyrinth to the south. That maze is called the Whispering Labyrinth. Solve all the puzzles in the 8 chambers, and you will receive a precious relic as a reward. Alan smiled and looked ahead. I still remember all the instructions and the exhilarating feeling of farming gear and leveling up. Before them stood a huge gate, covered in strange characters. He looked up in awe to see the labyrinth entrance in real life. Though he had grown bored of this place in the game, standing before it felt entirely different. Evan exclaimed in surprise, this gorge looks like it was hand-carved by people. How do you know places like this? Alan looked up and said, I've been here many times. He found that puzzling, you've been here many times. Alan laughed, just joking, I have my ways. Let's go. Seeing his serious face, Evan cried out, please don't say things like that with such a serious look on your face. As soon as they entered, they heard the roar of a monster above. Its massive hands slammed together, producing a terrible sound. Evan looked around and remarked, in a place like this, get one puzzle wrong and you're crushed. Alan silently assessed as the horrifying noises continued. Evan stared at his expressionless face as he wrote something on the stone slab. How can he remain so calm? He watched intently as Alan took notes, baffled even in this situation. Evan recalled 4 years together and still couldn't understand his young master. No two missions were the same. Repaying someone else's debt, helping a slave save an orphan, destroying a demonic organization, delivering a meaningless letter. At that moment the monster still seemed not finished, which made him more puzzled. And yet the young master knew this place inside out despite never leaving home. Alan calmly pointed at the monster. The puzzle is solved, but it hasn't opened. We have to wait for that thing to finish. The noises kept coming, and Evan continued thinking. Still, following this mysterious young master always led to good outcomes. They both looked over. He said, "Oh, it's opening." He thought to himself, "What are you planning this time, young master?" Deep inside, Alan rejoiced that the door was finally opening. "My God, I feel sick." Knew it would be hard, but didn't expect it to be this brutal. Evan nearly broke his neck trying not to look. And before them lay a pile of jewels lighting up the whole chamber. Evan cried, "Finally, it's done right." Alan replied calmly, "Yes, take the black ring and let's go." In the distance, 6 rings were mounted on a prosthetic hand. Evan said, "That looks uselessly dangerous." Alan picked up the black ring. "It's a bit large, but touching the others will only invite more trouble. Leave them be." He stared at the ring in silence, thinking, "Finally, I have a restraining band." Alan reassured him, "Don't worry, the way back is safe." Evan stammered, "Yes." Walking, he thought that remembering the game's instructions made this too easy, though his face didn't look good. "Young master, did you anticipate this beforehand?" Before them stood a group of colossal golems. It turned out the bronze rock in that gorge was a golem. Evan worriedly calculated, "An unidentified enemy, great. At least there must be a way to get you out of here." Alan stepped forward and said, "This time I'll handle it." Evan was stunned. At that moment, the monsters all turned toward them. Evan warned, "Whatever you plan to do, priority 1 is to get out of here." A golem lunged to attack. He shouted, "Wait, a level 2 spell won't be enough." At that instant, Alan quietly said, "Binding activated." The ring on his hand flashed with black light. Immediately after, the golems began to change, light gleaming. A voice echoed in the air. "Fragment that inherits the great will of Manhwa, speak 2 limits by which you may develop." Alan stood in the pitch-black space, looking around. In the game, a choice window would appear now, so that voice was it. A gigantic face emerged from the darkness, the reward for clearing the binding labyrinth. True to its name, it was a relic that absorbs power for its user, but in return it imposed strict bindings. Alan trembled, slightly tense. The voice sounded so real, as if he truly were inside that world. He spoke the first limit and the voice asked on. Alan formed a seal and answered, "In all operations, the hand seals of BOP YLO YA are absolutely mandatory." The voice asked, "What do you wish to gain from this binding?" He replied, "The power to bend the world's rules a little more." Streams of power in the air interwove. Evan looked up at the dark scene. Light gradually appeared and the voice rang out again, "The second limit." Alan formed another seal. "In all operations, only the sacred words of BOP IO may be used." The voice asked, "And what do you desire from this binding?" He answered calmly, "The same as before." The voice was silent for a moment. Alan looked up, puzzled. "Damn it, did I miss a step?" The skill icon mimicked it exactly, having chosen both the seals and the sacred words as limits to gain the strongest offensive power. He couldn't help sweating with worry. He had mastered the seals and incantations by playing countless times. That meant this had to work. Then the voice accepted. A faint voice said, "O human, remember the seals and runes of the great forgotten god. We express gratitude to the one who continues his will." Alan heard this and felt puzzled. Continue his will, what does that mean? Immediately after, the ring on his hand vanished. He guessed it was being absorbed into him. It seemed the binding had succeeded. The voice spoke one last time, "I have always watched you. You inherit that will." Back in reality, Evan was still shouting, "Young master, level 2 magic." Before him were the large monsters. He stretched out a hand in worried insufficiency. Alan looked up calmly, his eyes without a ripple, and his hand began to initiate magic. The iron orb should have shone brilliantly, but it only glimmered weakly despite him pouring all his mana into it. No matter how much he trained, he couldn't surpass the limit. Then it was time to test the binding's power. And its prize. With that thought in mind, the protagonist formed a magic orb inside his palm. Thus the orb gradually accumulated. The monsters charged forward. Alan raised his hand to direct the magic orb straight ahead. Time to test it. Alan immediately launched the magic orb. Next came the countershock technique, lightning bolts striking continuously into the cavern's channels. The orb grew ever brighter, blazing in the dim space. With the blue light technique, the orb enlarged and spun, firing successive bolts of lightning around. And finally, the linear diffraction technique. Alan expertly varied the hand movements for his spells. A powerful stream of electricity shot from his hand. The current fired straight into those who were chasing them. Evan stood dumbfounded, utterly amazed by the scene. The electricity hadn't fully dissipated. The giant stone men were struck motionless, drained of strength. Alan and Evan stood on the cliff watching silently. After only a few seconds of silence, another lightning storm rose up, sweeping through the remaining stone giants. Their limbs disintegrated and shattered, the lightning flashes faded. Looking down, the two saw the giants reduced to heaps of broken rock. Alan showed no change of expression, while Evan was still dazed, unconsciously exclaiming, "Damn, I can't believe it." They waited for the electricity on the cliff to clear before descending together. Along the way, Evan nagged Alan, "Have you been hiding your true power all this time?" Alan replied lightly, "Impossible." Evan didn't believe it and persisted, "What? In 15 years as a mercenary, I've never seen anything like this. You really call that just a level 2 magic?" But he only received the bland 2 words, "Yes, that's right." Alan left him speechless. Contrary to Alan's cold, expressionless face, he was full of inner turmoil. "I didn't foresee this either. It wasn't this powerful in the game, if I remember correctly." In Sikidir's turn-based combat system, magic can be enhanced each turn by seals or incantations. A turn-based combat system. Each time you win and complete a battle, the character in the virtual world receives an additional 10% attack power. And in the recent fight with the giant stone men, this was a chain-examining spell using 4 seals and chants. It had been enhanced over 5 turns. The more he thought, the more Alan unconsciously recalled each technique used. He had used a total of 4 techniques. The accumulated lightning was amplified and simultaneously formed a configuration suitable for a large area exam spell. In return, the restriction was that each spell required a master seal enchant, but in exchange one received superior power. Thinking this, Alan vaguely heard a strange voice ring in his head. "O forgotten mortal who still remembers the seals and mysteries of the great god, we thank you for inheriting his will." Reflecting on it, he drew his own conclusion. That must be why the magic was amplified many times over. All the way out, Alan's mind buzzed with thoughts. Still, this level 2 magic's power was overkill, far beyond expectations, even surprising me. Evan walked behind, finally exhaling with relief. We finally got out. He wearily sat on a stone ledge, leaning against the cliff, muttering, "This is more exhausting than fighting." Feeling worn out, Evan half scolded, half asked Alan, who in the world came up with such a horrible place. Alan didn't answer. He looked around and fell into thought. Come to think of it, the Whispering Labyrinth has another name. According to online information, it spread through the community via shared maps and guidebooks, and the buzz about this maze on social media was huge. What is the Panon Labyrinth? People keep saying Pan, what the hell is that? The Whispering Labyrinth is a mid-level grinding area in the game. According to the director, the labyrinth has an owner and can be farmed endlessly if you skip the rewards. Since when did it start being called Canon's Labyrinth? This question nagged at Alan, and he unconsciously asked aloud, since when did it start being called Canon's Labyrinth? Evan, distracted, didn't catch it and asked back, "Sorry, what did you just say?" Alan didn't repeat it. Instead, he pulled Evan up and deflected. "Let's head east. After 3 weeks of hard training, there's something I want to do when we return." Hearing that, Evan sighed helplessly. "What? You're more diligent than I thought." As he pulled Evan away, Alan thought, choosing seals aligned with the spell system increases power, and picking the right incantation enhances attributes. That's how the game operates. But unlike the game, where visuals don't change and only attack stats increase, each victory grants the player an additional 10% attack power. But in the recent battle, Alan noticed each seal altered the spell, and each incantation produced a distinct change. Thinking of this, Alan wondered, even though it was just a spell technique, could my mana control be refined enough to perceive those changes? Shaking off the cluttered thoughts, Alan finally told himself, when my mana recovers, I must test it again. After all, everything turned out well. In the dark, deep forest night, unbeknownst to Alan and Evan, Jane wrapped her cloak tight and hid in the shadows. After waiting for them to leave, she looked up, then nimbly leapt from cliff to cliff into the labyrinth. When she arrived, Jane paused and gazed at another large stone crowded with raised colored script. In any case, everything had ended well, and she recognized at once that these different characters were the script of the Lan Empire. Jane removed her hood and cloak and translated the strange inscription. It read, "For a friend about to be left alone, the sword Saint Ban stood steadfast." Then she gently touched the raised colored letters with her hand. Vivid images flashed through Jane's mind. He had repelled the invasion of the Black Count and defeated Awakan Ao, who once devoured the hearts of his people. The resplendent Emperor Great Ban On lived on in his subjects' hearts, bravely fighting the fierce giant dragon with the divine sword in hand. Then the scene rewound to Jane herself hovering above, surrounded by flying books, a voice echoing in her head constantly reminding her, "I know all, for I was born with a great mission in the ancient library." Back in reality, Jane recalled earlier when she stood on the cliff looking down at Alan, and she seemed to realize something. Yes, Banon was the one who created it. I have known the Empress Bo Ludia is different from the one recorded in history, so I suspected something extraordinary. Images of Empress Bo Ludia, Emperor Great Ban Alan, and Alan kept circling in Jane's mind. Yet she could not stop the stream of thoughts in her head. Think about it, even the Great Moon once called Panon a friend worthy of reverence. Moreover, the incantation he whispered doesn't even exist in any records of the ancient library. Recalling Alan's recent fight with the giants, the spells he used were what troubled Jane most. She was extremely curious, who after all was that man? When leaving the labyrinth, Jane felt a little shy and murmured, "Everything Hong and Guyot said is true. I'm ashamed for having blindly followed orders." But then her expression instantly turned cold as usual, and she asked as if confirming, "Has he arrived?" She looked up at the person standing on the branch and wondered, "Did you get the information?" Deus touched coldly and replied, "The man in black has died." His neck was suddenly twisted twice midair, and that was Alan's feet. 2. Jane, upon hearing this, briefly said, "I will report this for proper handling." In the dead of night, the pale moon hung high among the trees, and 2 figures shot through the sky. Meanwhile, at Count Onia's mansion in a room, CIA sat on the sofa, sipping tea, her gaze distant as she said idly, "Strange family, it's not just a rumor." Kaya fell into thought, unconsciously remembering Alan, inwardly remarking, "His gaze is truly cold and emotionless. Like a bottomless abyss," she sneeringly wondered, "famous as he." Then she leaned back in her chair and answered her own question. Indeed, Count Onia is both powerful and renowned. Kaya's gaze darkened as she commented, "But it's strange that someone who rarely socializes like you is seen as famous by everyone." Having said that, Kalia stood and slowly walked toward the man at his desk, smiling as she asked, "Isn't that truly odd, father?" The man paused his pen at her call and turned to look. He observed seriously as she continued, because you are the count. Kare approached and gave a faint, cold smile. Then she snapped her fingers. In the man's eyes, Kalia's figure twitched and flickered. He collapsed helplessly, the brush in his hand dropping limp. Seeing this, Kalia was extremely pleased, smiling with glee and mocking arrogantly. No one would suspect that I am the one truly running the family while father merely plays the fool. How could they find out? Recalling the banquet, Alan had been completely unaware that the watcher in the distance was placed by her, and he even kindly warned her that many eyes were watching. Kea privately delighted. Even the spy I planted seems to have been discovered. Just then, a guard burst in, calling urgently Miss Kalia. She leaned against the wall, hands on her hips, and asked, "What's the matter?" The guard immediately reported, "Miss, please return to your room at once." Kalia followed the guard back to the room, and upon opening the door, saw the spy bloodied and slumped against the wall. The guard cautiously told her it seems the seal wasn't activated, meaning he hasn't revealed the secret. Kea said gravely, "He deliberately placed it in my room." She stopped there, leaving the sentence half finished. A few seconds later, Kalia laughed and mocked herself. How could they have discovered this? From the moment we met, I was struck at my greatest weakness, wasn't I? Her face contorted into an angry scowl. Meanwhile, Evan and Alon were dozing in the carriage on the way back. Evan's loud snoring roused Alon groggily. He scratched his ear and dozed off again. Cut to night at the Duchy Estates. Lodi sat in the carriage, filled with panic, thinking, indeed not an ordinary person. She recalled underworld figures with cold eyes just like her father's. These are people one must never confront. Leah sadly remembered when Alan turned away coldly. He was my last lifeline. She was filled with disappointment but thought, he's not likely to accept such a losing deal. Logia remembered her siblings who had been stripped of all wealth and power by the cruelest brothers. T. Malian of the boys' school, Mari Diane of the girls' school, the third daughter by Gi and the second son KGG. Looking at herself, she thought, because I have nothing left. Logia looked at the familiar yet strange lavish building and thought, I've survived so far thanks to my father's mercy and love. What now? In any case, I still have to step into that cold building. Suddenly, a loud call rang out. Miss Logia, the youngest miss, has returned. Two maids ran up from a distance, anxiously reporting. Miss Baiji and young Master KGG have been killed. On hearing this, Leah went pale. What? Images of those two flashed in her mind, the kind who would stab even their own family. Could it be them? That's impossible, Logia whispered. What about T. Malian and Mari Diane? Immediately, a piercing scream echoed. The servants rushed into the source of the noise. Everyone was shocked to see the two of them stabbing at each other with swords. The atmosphere turned chaotic. Leah stood stunned and wondered, what is going on? They didn't know that on the roof, a small figure was darting away like lightning. Coldly smiling, finished dealing with it and then leaped away out of sight. The servants scattered in panic and Leah murmured, her frightened face recalling Alan's words when he once turned back and said something puzzling. Good things will happen. Alan's expression at that time had been terrifying, hiding and waiting for the right moment, concealing his claws to seize the position. The true power behind the Count's family has arrived, and she trembled in fear. Is that what you mean? Like him, I became the sole heir of the ducal family overnight. After a moment, Logia exhaled. She thought to herself, I don't even know how far-reaching the pact I signed with that unreasonable devil was, but there's no turning back. Logia immediately turned and resolved, what would happen if I betrayed him? There have already been too many precedents. I have no choice but to continue down the path I've chosen. Time jumped to 2 months later at Alon's mansion. A man entered respectfully. I come on the orders of Duke and Tia. He was surprised, Duke and Tia. Evan beside him peeked curiously and exclaimed when he saw an extremely rare bottle of wine. He'd heard each bottle cost thousands of gold, and he never expected to see one in person. It came with a letter as well. Alan was astonished. To Logia and Tia, not the Duke but Logia the youngest, prepared this. Why send it to me while I'm struggling to survive on the run? He asked the man, is this really for me? The man bowed and replied, yes, the Duke prepared it personally and ordered me to deliver it by hand. Hearing this, Alan was startled, the Duke personally. Wait, so that means Logia the youngest has unexpectedly become Duke and Tia. At that moment, she was focused on paperwork at her desk. After a while, Lodi stretched. 2 months passed so quickly. She couldn't help remembering that after their father's funeral, he died of illness. She held the succession ceremony and became the Duchess. Leah rose and sighed. At first, I couldn't even enter this office. She still couldn't forget that horrific night. Although her siblings died suddenly, she escaped suspicion because she had an alibi, the ball. At that time, even her secret organization had been wiped out by her siblings, so when she returned to the mansion, that should have been when she faced the greatest danger. Leah couldn't help feeling confused and terrified. By the time she realized it, it was too late. She reeled, thinking, he took advantage of the whole situation. She pictured the scene again. On the surface, he refused coldly, but then he handled everything perfectly. Recalling it, Lodi remained unsettled. Just how many moves ahead had he planned? For fear of bothering anyone, I didn't even announce the funeral. She walked alone through the splendid mansion. Clearly, he needed Antia for some plan, which is why he came to me. As she walked, Logia thought, although I've consolidated the organizations under Antia, they still can't compare to the power he's concealing. She suspected inwardly, he wants something else from me. Alon's image appeared in her mind, a crime lord who built power through business. If it's something he lacks but I possess. His image seemed to grow darker. Alon's picture rose in her mind, a crime lord who built his power purely through business. If it's something he lacks but I possess, his image only grows darker. Manipulating politics from the shadows, what of Antia's reputation? Leah looked up at the painting on the wall. For now, I must focus on what needs to be done. She turned and stood before the Duke's portrait, thinking my patron will contact me soon. Lodi smiled softly. I hope this token of thanks pleases you. Across the room, the man bowed and left the Duke's chamber. I will take my leave. Alan remained puzzled. Logia was once threatened with death, yet now she has become the Duchess. How did that happen? Something's off. Evan beside him tilted his head in curiosity. Everything felt very strange. Time moved forward a few months to winter, 5 years before the rules began. Alan was walking when someone suddenly called out, "Young master." Evan ran over to ask, "Young master, oh no, now your account right," he replied. Although the succession ceremony hasn't happened yet, the new year has arrived, so one can use the title. Alan felt a pang of disappointment. My grand life plan never included becoming a count. It was Seidel's glorious rule, conquer Jyot Emin, avoid succession fights, travel America style. Still, one grows used to it, and he enjoyed the perks of nobility to the fullest. It's even better than he expected. Evan then handed over a letter. This is a letter from Dutia. As he entered the room, Alan asked, by the way, any news on Leo's assassins? He answered, nothing clear yet. The Intelligence Council is investigating thoroughly. We'll have to wait and see. They sat down and Evan spoke. So what is your objective, sir? Not revenge, I hope, he thought. The changes from the game are butterfly effects I caused. Alan said, just to guard against unforeseen situations. Evan suddenly laughed. You looked very count-like just now. He sighed at that. Let it be so. Alan looked at the letter with curiosity. I wonder what this one's about. At that moment, the letter's content appeared. How are you? We're all well as usual. Everyone is absorbed in their own hobbies. In particular, Duer's puppet play has reached a truly high level. On the other side, they were all very cheerful. An Lang was engrossed playing games with friends. And the other members? Rin has been quietly reading but often inventing things. Day Dawn has found a knack for landscape design. After reading the letter, Alan smiled gently. The daily life at the orphanage, used to exchanging letters monthly, warmed him more and more. Though he'd never met them, seeing the children he'd sponsored grow up made him smile like a true father. Then he suddenly asked Evan, by the way, the 5 elders know, how old are those children now? Evan, curious, asked back, why do you ask? He then answered, it's nearly time for them to enter society. Some left the orphanage earlier. Most of those you personally ordered to be found are around that age. Hearing this, Alan's pristine image of them in his head seemed to crack slightly. He couldn't help imagining the children thanking him, thank you for raising us. Respectfully, the 5 elders. Alan immediately thought, right, that's how it is. Gradually, we must let them out into the world. Evan asked again, really? Didn't you deliberately gather these weak children? Alan replied calmly, there was no reason. They've grown. It's time to think of their future. But inwardly, he thought differently. Having been cared for so they wouldn't awaken to crime, they should be able to fend for themselves, right? Evan, hearing this, exclaimed, it seems they are all healthy now. So that's it, Alan began to think. In each boss fight, the narration briefly revealed their abilities. Dutia has a talent for faith. Next was that gloomy boy, S-letter-1-EDD, who has a talent for swordsmanship. Then the girl Jin, who has a talent for research. Next was the beast child An Lang with combat talent. And finally Day Dawn, who has the apostle ability. Alan suddenly picked up a box. If he placed them in the right positions, wouldn't they be able to hold key roles? He thought of those kids and guessed inwardly, since it's already done, giving each of them a gift they'd like would be nice. After all, I did promise to give them something. After a while, time shifted to late afternoon. The sunset cast light on the mansion. Alan sat at his desk, stretched and sighed, all done. Evan, still with drool at the corner of his mouth, ran off saying, I'm off then. Alan watched him go and thought, if things go smoothly, will I get even a tiny share of the benefits? At that moment, small birds flew peacefully across the sky. Children, take this letter and step out into the wider world. Cut to the children Alan mentioned. His instructions felt like an order. Dutia kept a cold face but blushed as she read the letter. This time, the directive was sent individually to each person. All 5 of them held their letters in hand. GS-letter-1-EDD kept a cold expression and calmly read his. An Lang jumped and danced with joy when he received his letter. Jin smiled gently and Day Dawn said nothing. While Dutia lowered her gaze and stared at the letter, her emotions unreadable. In the room, everyone gathered and focused on the paper in their hands. The orders had arrived. However, this time he had sent them privately to each of us. An Lang suddenly grabbed his paper, leaped up in excitement and cheered. Day Dawn and Jane held their papers but were pensive and silent. Dutia held several letters and said calmly, but before doing anything, we should reread the previous letters, because his orders demand a very high level. An Lang, excited, asked, can we really read them? Before only you could read them. Dutia remained composed. That he sent orders individually means he decided it's time for everyone to know. The letter opened and Dutia began to read. How have you been lately? It seems you have many talented friends, right? Let me know if you need anything. An Lang looked at the letter, scratched his cheek and found it puzzling. Is this an order? Jin also read it and felt it seemed more like casual chit-chat. Dutia snorted at their comments. Exactly. He disguised the order as casual conversation from the start. Okay, look. She analyzed the letter for the group. This is the first order after the greeting letter. It says, Dutia, are you well? I'm fine. Today your elder brother used me as a chair. Funny, isn't it? Sometimes I want to send you letters. Reply if you're okay. And the child I sent this time. Dutia analyzed. He designates targets to be eliminated as missions and asks us to report back. The letter continues. Thanks for replying. I hope you can tell me what happens at the orphanage each month. I entrust that place to you. You'll be fine together. Dutia continued. This is when he entrusts Lam and Gayat to me. As you can see, he personally selected each of you. Everyone nearby immediately gaped in surprise. Zeus S. Letter 1 EDD, hearing Dutia, showed understanding. I get it. It's to prevent information leaks, right? I remember my first order. She laughed and added, like this, you all must fully understand the orders and carry out the missions. Zeus S. Letter 1 EDD suggested. Then should we go meet him directly, or wouldn't using a magical communication device be better? Daedon agreed. He's got a point. If it's about information leaks, why use letters? Dutia's expression suddenly changed, her face darkening, red eyes flashing with a cold light. I hope you haven't forgotten that all we must do is follow orders. Ju's S. Letter 1 EDD fell silent at Dutia's unwavering loyalty, feeling a steady trust that sent shivers through him. I haven't forgotten. Suddenly, An Lang raised his paper high and shouted excitedly, then let's read the orders together. In the brightly lit room, everyone formed a circle and read the orders sent individually to each of them. Ju's S. Letter 1 EDD read his assignment. He told me to go to Caliber, the Kingdom of Nights. An Lang sighed in disappointment, a continent, but I don't like deserts. Daedon continued, and I'm assigned to Ratch So S, the entertainment city. Jin was assigned elsewhere. He told me to go to Latania, the labyrinth city. Dutia's eyes glazed with delight as she clutched the order passionately. The holy nation, Rosa. All the tasks everyone must do are written in the letter, right? GS Letter 1 EDD held his order with an emotionless voice. I don't know the reason, but he told me to become a knight. An Lang cheered. He also said not to worry, sponsorship will continue. Jin smiled and added, he also told us the locations of the gifts. Daedon seemed pleased. Whatever they are, we'll find out when we arrive. Dutia instructed, but remember, unless he states it first, do not under any circumstances mention the name Lam and Gayat. Her gaze turned cold and sharp. The group quickly obeyed the orders, donning black cloaks, and left the mansion. 3 months later, in a room stacked with books, Alan was reading. Indeed, there was nothing mentioning changes to magic or spells. I'll have to experiment myself. He turned to Evan and asked, any progress gathering information on who killed Leo? Evan answered, the Intelligence Guild says they still haven't found anything. Alan, hearing this, felt a bit disappointed. Is that so? He propped his hand on his chin and thought, it seems the butterfly effects have gotten out of my control. This is the result of saving the 5 elders' lives. Alan remembered the cold Duchess Logia. In fact, Logia, who was supposed to die in the story, had become Duchess in Tia, expanding power and influence in the underworld at an astonishing speed. The more he thought, the darker Alan's face became. He set the book down and ordered Evan, stop the assassin investigation. Evan was startled. Huh, really? Inwardly, Alan thought, clearly, ignorance would be bliss here. In the setting, almost nothing could escape the Intelligence Guild's network. But if we keep digging into things we shouldn't know, the more he thought, the more terrified he became, his face paling. If excessive precaution leads to death, then all defenses are meaningless. To protect himself, Alan had no choice. After all, such secret organizations wouldn't harm him as long as he didn't interfere with them. There was no reason for them to attack unless he approached them first. Alan said to Evan, at this rate, continuing is pointless. Although he didn't fully understand Alan's purpose, Evan agreed, all right, I'll tell them to stop the investigation. Suddenly, Evan remembered another piece of news and hurried to tell Alan, right, there's one more thing. It seems Jews was recently knighted in Caliber. Hearing this, though expressionless, Alan politely congratulated him. Really good for him. 3 months later, Evan came running to Alan carrying a pile of food. Count, what do you think of multi-talented Evan? Then whispered self-praise, truly talented, huh? At that moment he added to Alan, note has now formed an entire knight squad. Alan was stunned. What? Then he must be at least at expert level or higher. Alan recalled the knight ranks in this world, swordmaster, sword expert, and swordsman. The more he thought, the more amazed he was. It hasn't been long since he was first commissioned, has it? Evan added, people are saying the world might witness the 5th Great Knight within less than 10 years. Alan suddenly remembered and asked about the Great Knights. You mean those called the Swords of Caliber? Evan confirmed, yes, he's truly talented. Alan felt a bit proud. I'm quite proud of him. Evan chewed and said, Caliber must be in an uproar over this. 6 months later, in a magnificent castle, Alan was absorbed in his work. A year had passed since the 5 great sinners left the orphanage. Just as he was getting used to his duties as Count, Evan entered with news. My Lord Count, I've just heard something very new. Alan kept working with his hands. Evan continued. It seems Jews has become a sword of Caliber. The next piece of news stunned Alan so much he dropped his pen. He has become the 5th great knight. Alan found it hard to believe and asked quickly, but only a swordmaster can become a great knight, right? He recalled what he knew about becoming a knight here. Seiki Delir's swordmaster was a superhuman who surpassed even sword aura and unlocked a unique ability called enactment. Alan asked Evan again, so you're saying Jews is already a swordmaster? He corrected him. More precisely, he's about to become one of them, but he hasn't produced his own enactment yet. Evan recounted Jews' rise to knighthood. In any case, the nation has bestowed upon him the title of Great Knight. not only because he won a duel against the fourth sword, but also because Caliber had lost a great knight to those northern barbarians. Hearing this, Alan suddenly remembered, that's right, they've been at war for over a decade. Evan also found it hard to believe. Perceiving and controlling mana takes up to 15 years, the enactment process requires at least several decades. He recalled the Empire's history. The first sword Jay was 32 when he became the youngest great knight in history. The history of that heroic knight was replayed. Program Y accepted him as a temporary teammate who would be eliminated after the program ended. Jay had held a sword since he was 5. Have some faith in becoming the youngest swordmaster in history. Alan thought to himself, indeed the end string is incredibly strong. Even with his talent it would take over 20 years. How could a child with no knowledge of swordsmanship become a great knight? Then a thought occurred, wait, if he's just waiting for his enactment, does that mean he'll soon surpass the end string and become a swordmaster? The idea pleased Alan and he couldn't help blurting out, maybe I can ride his coattails sooner than expected. Evan nodded in agreement. Alan looked at the mess of books on the table and fell into thought, or maybe not, perhaps it's impossible. Evan quickly waved his hand, no, he wouldn't do that. Alan revealed a fact, pulling the single letter bookmarked in a book out. I mean, I've only received letters from Dutia. He read Dutia's letter aloud. Even after arriving in the Holy Nation, the letters she sent were regular, containing news about the great sinner she grew up with. It seems they still keep in touch. Alan felt a twinge of loss. Although they've never seen my face, they should at least thank me for the gift. I feel a little guilty. He slapped his face hard as if to wake himself. Evan watched the action in horror. Alan told himself, back to the main issue, I'm already extremely grateful that they didn't destroy the kingdom after awakening as the 5 great sinners. The two stood shoulder to shoulder by the sunlit window. Alan said reluctantly, as long as they're living well, I'm content. Late afternoon over Caliber's capital, the Central District, the mansion of a high-ranking noble, where the famed Eclipse cavalry is quartered. At this moment, countless swordsmen were training inside. Juz donned his armor, standing proudly on high to survey the scene. He was introduced as Jean, captain of the Eclipse cavalry and the youngest great knight. Juz looked down at the knights below with a cold gaze. Suddenly, a girl below noticed him. The little purple-haired girl waved and called out, Big brother. He smiled and waved back, but Juz's expression darkened as he sadly recalled, it's been exactly 1 year. Thinking back, he still felt ashamed for having lost everything to those shadows. The horrific images kept replaying in his mind. Painful childhood memories surged back, leaving only uncontrollable rage. The image of his sister being consumed by darkness drifting from his embrace. Juz was held back by the darkness, the distance between him and his sister growing, and hatred welled up within him. The miserable wandering of his childhood returned. Though submerged in suffering, he still clutched his sister's hairpin. Juz's true thoughts gradually emerged. The fact that Great Moon saved my life was not reason enough for me to swear loyalty to her. But because she promised I could take revenge with my own hands, I obeyed orders under the name Lam and Guyot. From that moment, he began selling his life to Lam and Guyot. Serving as part of Lam and Guyot meant undergoing numerous dangerous missions and trainings. Though death was always near, for vengeance Juz no longer cared for his own safety. Memories surged like a flood. Over the years, he completed missions that would form the foundation to fight the shadows. And very soon after, he received a personal order for the first time. Juz was astonished to receive a secret order. This is too unexpected. What is this? In the letter, Alan revealed a small inn located south of Caliber. I left a gift there, go take a look, but Juz wasn't very interested. The gift did not excite him much. Still, he went to the place Alan had mentioned. Juz was a bit curious, could there be something here? When he opened the door, the scene inside left him stunned. In that unexpected room, he saw the silhouette of a familiar sister. The gift from Great Moon was the family I thought I had lost forever. Juz embraced the little girl, collapsing to the ground from joy and emotion. The girl hugged him back, tears streaming. More precious than life itself, Juz sobbed silently and uncontrollably. The two reunited and hugged each other tightly in happiness. Dayu still couldn't believe his eyes. My sister, the one I thought was dead, was still alive. Only after their emotions calmed did they gently pull apart. His voice trembling, he asked, Silai, what happened after I lost you? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, C squeezed Deus's hand to reassure him. With his other hand, he tenderly wiped away the remaining tears at his sister's eye. They then went back inside and sat at the table to continue talking. Zai clutched the cup in her hand and slowly began to tell. After those people took me away in the darkness, I had to wait my turn for a very long time. I was imprisoned in a dark dungeon. There were many other cells around where the captured huddled in silence and despair. I don't know how long passed, Silai recalled. And when it was my turn to be killed, I was the last one left standing. The walls and the floor were littered with bloodied corpses. Zai let out a desperate scream, her cloak was torn off, and a beam of light shone in. Someone had grabbed her hand. She was able to escape with that light and survive. And a few years later, when I was nearly sold to a slaver, desperation surrounded me again, especially when a giant hand clamped onto me. At that very moment, the flashes from the sword kept sweeping across. A figure appeared, swinging a blade and cutting that hand into pieces. The person quickly stood between X-Lai and the threat. She remembered a mercenary named Evan had saved her. C-Lai stepped forward and opened a cabinet. After that, she received precious medicine from her benefactor. She picked up a letter on which was a note from Alan Palacio. I will continue to send medicine and support you. You will be safe under the Palacio name. Also, don't worry about your brother. Zai was full of gratitude. She was deeply thankful for what he had done for her. When he learned this, Deus was astonished. Did he use his name to protect her? How could D-stroke letter 1EA1INGUY letter 1EC7T have found out about this? He quietly hugged his arm, full of doubt. I never told anyone about my family, and Yusha only realized that the black sheep had captured me. So how? Deus suddenly recalled what Yusha had said. She knows everything. In his mind, it was as if every piece began to click into place. All his questions assembled like a jigsaw and vanished. All his questions assembled like a jigsaw and vanished. Back then I couldn't understand Yusha's worry. She said something cryptic, a sword can't think for itself, right? Only now does Deus realize, yet the fool was himself. Good things will come, that was what Alan once said. Deus stroked his chin and thought. Looking back, what he said then meant he already knew everything. And he had hinted that the child would have to survive on their own. He couldn't help shivering as he stared blankly. Seelai tilted her head in confusion. Brother. He came to his senses and gently stroked her head, though his mind kept wandering. His lord's sword had dared to act on its own, but he still chose to be magnanimous and merciful, and all this time Deus thought he was being controlled by him, while he himself only nursed bitterness and intentions of revenge against the black sheep. He sat at the table. Zai brought over a tray of hot food. Seeing the radiant smile on his sister's face, Deus suddenly recognized that his family's survival was an invaluable gift. Yusha's cold voice returned in his memory. You will soon understand. Why did I follow that man? He realized she was not simply a zealot, nor did she trust him blindly. And that letter advised Deus to go to Caliban and become a knight. He vowed to himself that he must repay him. His mission was to become the leader in Caliber, a grand knight, and form his own order gathering the finest swordsmen. That belief was like sunlight illuminating a dark world. He snapped out of the reverie. At that moment Deus's subordinate stepped forward to report, Captain, it's time. He moved up onto the high platform. Below, the order of knights stood in neat, solemn ranks. Under the moonlight, each face was sharp, eyes resolute. Deus told himself this expedition would be the first stepping stone for the eclipse. He cared not what hardships would come. He gently stroked the purple-sheathed sword in his hand, the moonlight glinting off the metal. Then in that faint light, Deus so drew his sword coldly, full of pride. I will wait for the day I can offer my gratitude along with a fitting repayment to please him. I must prove it under the moon. On a day when snow blanketed the sky, the Eclipse Corps set out on their expedition against the Man tribe. Meanwhile at the Palacio Manor, Alan leaned against the wall with a sigh. So peaceful, perhaps it's because my children have all grown up now. A gust of wind suddenly blew a page, sending the notes fluttering away. He hurriedly snatched them, they were all blowing away. Alan resumed the work he had paused. Let's see. After returning from the labyrinth, I focused on studying the keywords I was writing. He suddenly paused his pen and wondered. Why did I write in cursive? From now on I'll write more neatly. Alan nodded. Very good, my reports are complete. On the page, he concentrated his analysis on the keywords, each of which changes differently. Alan circled the word contraction. This reinforces defects in magic. More specifically, contraction reinforces the flaws within each completed incantation, causing its range to expand. Additionally, contraction also serves to disrupt the form and alter the emitted object. Transformation, changing states. This is demonstrated in practice. It will repel, it will break the form, affecting the object's transformation. Regarding blue light, he noted reinforcing parallel magic such as lightning magic. When executed, it will spiral into a large sphere, emitting bolts of electric light. Additionally, the diffraction path has two major effects, penetration and critical hit. Specifically, the diffraction path grants piercing capability, meaning a critical effect that increases the ability to kill enemies. And importantly, in keyword rules, if it is broken, the spell will fail. There are also several notes. Do not use inappropriate keywords, do not repeat the same word, use at most 4 words. Alan scratched his head with his pen. With my mana core, I can only use 1 spell per day, so it took a very long time to discover all this. He recalled his days of research. In this world's configuration, the hand signs and keywords of baby Elelania had long been forgotten, so there was no information about them. There were no records of where they were written. Alan read many books but found nothing. In the end, he had to study them himself and found it somewhat interesting even though he only learned defensive magic. He then stood and walked into the empty garden, raising his hand to fire bolts of lightning. All right, it's time to see the results of 2 months of experiments. With one hand, Alan held the index finger of his other hand. From that finger condensed more lightning spreading into the air. They slowly spiraled and then converged at a point in the sky. He focused intensely, removing the focal point of this mana sphere and creating an imbalance to trigger the lightning. This weak and useless magic is the test subject. Soon a sphere appeared in the air. It spun continuously in midair. Alan silently chanted the sealing incantation. The sphere shrank from large to small, but its power remained strong. He continued applying his research by invoking the breaking keywords. It began to forge a specific purpose. Flowers bloom in March. The lightning from Alan's hands gradually turned blue. They grew intense. From a sphere, it developed like a large trunk. The lightning spread out like branches. Looking at the result before him, he couldn't help but marvel. So order matters too. Alan muttered, because when I used break first, it failed. Before he could finish speaking, a shout cut through his thoughts. No, impossible. He was startled and immediately spun around. At that moment, 2 people who had been there unnoticed were now standing there. Kalia looked pale and suspicious. Origin magic. Alan stared at her in surprise. What? Why is Kalia here? The person beside her trembled. Using origin magic means he has reached the level of a 7th circle maid. He felt his mouth twitch at the thought, origin magic really. In the reception room of the Palacio Manor, Kalia and Vinyl sat in silence waiting for Alan. Kalia couldn't help feeling tense. Her mind was anxious. She had two clear reasons for coming here. First, to confirm the intentions of Baron Ban Lao. The holder of the trump card could cause serious damage to Zenonia. After all, Kalia herself now runs Zenonia. Her father is merely a puppet she pulls the strings of. So determining Alan's motives is her top concern. Second, to probe the level of the organization protecting him, the group that helped him manipulate Pana's you. Although this reason isn't crucial, Kalia was genuinely curious which mysterious organization had helped Alan achieve today's success. Instead, what she learned was that she never imagined seeing this arrogant mage tremble with fear. Indeed, right now Veal sitting beside her was shaking so badly he couldn't sit still. Viancle, a 5th circle mage expelled from the Tower of Magic. Because of his inhumane experiments, he could easily annihilate an entire legion of soldiers. Even though he still acted arrogantly toward me, despite me being his longtime patron. A cold-blooded, calculating person who successfully carried out such cruel deeds, now he was trembling, his face ashen and sweating profusely. Kalia stared at him in disbelief, thinking she could sense his fear. She had never seen him like this before. She was left wondering, was that really origin magic? Then the sound of the door opening and a deep voice cut through her thoughts. With just a single word to announce himself, Alan slowly entered the room. He stepped before Kalia and Vinyl and coldly asked, "What brings you to this domain?" Kalia sat up straight and careful and polite said, "I apologize for the sudden visit. I was so eager to meet you that before she could finish, Alan interrupted politely, saying he would not blame her. The young lady of Dusnonia finished speaking and he folded his hands, looking at her seriously. Though his tone was casual, he said firmly, "However, let me make one thing clear. What I just used is not origin magic. If you truly want to classify my magical power, I am only at the 2nd circle level." He spoke directly to the point without concealment. Pausing, he glanced at Vinyl and confidently said, "The mage beside you must have realized that magic had no practical effect." Inside, he felt regretful, thinking unfortunately that magic can't be used for offense or defense. Hearing his words, Kalia and Vinyl shared the same thought. He meant he seemed to sense something from him. Veal spoke in a low tone and used a whisper to remind Kalia, "Keep quiet about what you just saw." Upon hearing this, Kalia stiffened with tension. Veal trembled and stammered a sincere apology to him. "You're right, it seems I misjudged it." Kalia looked at him puzzled and uneasy, thinking Veal is being polite. Alan gave a slight nod to let it pass. Hearing him, they both breathed a sigh of relief. He didn't press them further and straightforwardly said, "Good, now that the misunderstanding is resolved, let's get to the main matter." Kalia hesitated but then carefully said, "I thought I should visit you after finishing my duties." Alan asked her indifferently, "You really don't have any special reason?" Kalia flusteredly replied, "No." Alan wearily lowered his eyes and hinted, "What a pity, I have work to do so I can't stay long here." "Be smart." Kalia quickly stood, took a polite breath and said, "I understand, thank you for taking the time to see me, we will take our leave now." Alan leaned back in his chair, his tone half joking, half serious, suggesting, "If you need someone to talk to, I advise you to see Duchess Altia, I think you two would get along." Saying this, he looked straight at Kalia. Kalia's expression dimmed slightly. She understood that his words were not casual remarks. After a few seconds of silence, she bowed in salute. "Yes, I promise, if you say so I will visit her." Both Alan and Evan escorted the guests to the door, watching the luxurious carriage depart. Evan curiously asked Alan why a member of Zenonia, a declining Western house, had come here. Alan answered honestly, "I don't know, I can't even imagine the reason, but deep down I feel this will be troublesome. If false rumors spread that I used origin magic, those who crave fighting the strong will begin seeking me out to provoke trouble." He meant this world is a FantasyManhwa realm. Just imagining it, he pictured evil forces gathering against him. Returning inside, Alan walked anxiously thinking, hoping she understood his meaning. Zenonia would never seek out Altia, who is competing in the underworld. Also, he silently prayed, "Just as long as they don't come after me." The sky was clear as the carriage headed back. Kalia's voice drifted faintly from outside. "What Baron Banlat Io used? Was it really origin magic?" She asked this as she sat waiting earnestly for Vinyl's answer. Vinyl's complexion still hadn't recovered. He hesitated and replied, "No, it wasn't." Hearing that, Kalia pressed on, "Then what was his display just now?" At that question, Vinyl trembled again. He explained gravely, "Origin magic is a kind of sorcery that draws its own laws. On the veil of absolute immutable principles, it is reserved for mages who have reached the pinnacle. However, what the Baron used was different. As you requested, I used my observing eye to examine his magic." While Alan and Kalia were talking, he secretly activated his duty. He truly saw a veil split open, releasing a gloomy aura that wrapped around him. He was tearing that very veil apart. He was distorting those absolute immutable principles. He fixed the thunderous judgment. The more Vinyl spoke, the more agitated he became, shouting that the observing eye had shown him sights that cannot be seen. Vinyl then screamed violently that it was breaking them and collapsing the laws themselves. But even after doing all that, the magic still manifested. He had produced an impossible miracle. Hearing this, Kalia's face darkened. She widened her eyes in fear and stared at Vinyl. It didn't stop there. Vinyl continued in a hoarse, deep voice, but what happened afterward was truly. That cracked ice and a dark, blood-red eye were actually hidden deep within Alan. It was clearly that of a great forgotten god. Thinking this, Vinyl grimaced and slumped, his arm trembling as he clutched his head, muttering to himself to stop, thinking further would be dangerous. As if remembering something, he lifted his face and solemnly warned Kalia, "When I was young, I delved so deeply into ancient knowledge that I was praised for my research on the magic of the Forgotten Era. Let me make this clear, do not oppose Baron Ban La Yo." Kalia knit her brow and retorted sarcastically, "So you mean someone as ordinary as me probing his intentions is pointless?" Veal knew that Logia and Kalia were merely pawns toyed with by Alan, but he couldn't state it plainly. He only briefly suggested to Kalia, "I advise you to see Duchess Altia." Although he didn't spell it out, Kalia seemed to vaguely realize that she had become his pawn. Months later, about 2 years after the children left the orphanage at Baron Pan Lacio's manor, just as Evan opened the door to his study, Alan called Evan. When Evan came before him, Alan handled some documents while asking about news. "Do you have any new information, preferably about the children?" Evan hesitated and replied, "Not about the children." Then he continued, "But it seems the domain in the Ania Duchy have allied." Hearing this, Alan was struck dumb as if by lightning. He froze and asked Evan, "What? The two leading forces of the underworld have allied?" Evan nodded. "Camdone confirmed it because this is an underworld pact outsiders can't know about, but I'm certain of it." Alan was thrown into turmoil, inwardly lamenting that he'd forced the culprit onto another path. Now he had to face an alliance between two masterminds. Is the kingdom of Ateir about to collapse? Thinking that, he wondered, wait, could she have actually believed me back then? Recalling the previous meeting, he had suggested to Kalia that if she needed someone to talk to, she should see Duchess Altia. At the thought, he was filled with remorse. Pushing aside distracting thoughts, Alan reassured himself, no, it's probably only a temporary alliance. With Kalia's cold and proud nature, she wouldn't. Still, Alan reconsidered and decided he should at least prepare a little. Acting on it, he took a sheet of paper and seriously wrote a letter to Kalia. Addressed to Kalia, "Forgive me if I seem overly blunt and cold. The reason is that I'm not very good with words. I hope this is not perceived as an excuse." Sunlight streamed through the window pane. After finishing the letter, he handed it to Evan and waved his hand. "This is for you, Evan." Before leaving the room, Evan promised, "I'll send this to the domain's young lady through the Mercenaries Guild, and I'll keep an eye on the children." The room was left with only Alan. He looked at the letters in his hand, worriedly wondering how Day Dawn and Zhan Jiang were faring. He hadn't heard from them since Yusha wrote that they had arrived. Thinking of mischievous Xiaorang, he couldn't help but anxiously hope she hadn't starved on the road. Recalling the letter he sent to Xiaorang, he privately believed that if she found the gift he mentioned, she would become the pinnacle of warriors. As he knew, the magic hand is the essence of the Golden Mane tribe. When equipped, it increases critical hit chance by 20%. If the arrogant sinner had obtained this item, she would not have fallen and become a sinner. Instead, she would have become a great wolfkin warrior, according to the item's description. Alan's gaze drifted to the sky as he fretted, wondering if he'd revealed the location of the secret treasure he intended as an emergency fund. I mean, she's talented enough to earn her own keep, so she'll be fine, right? That place is a nation of warriors. A land where strength can grant you the world, the desert nation, pristine and full of sand. Under the star-studded night sky, deep within a cave, Xiaorang trotted along the rough dirt path as she emerged. Outside, she stretched and cried out with joy. Finally, the trial was over. Looking at the magic hand treasure on her wrist, Xiaorang grinned in gratitude. "Great Moon, thank you for this gift." She danced and waved her arms, chuckling and murmuring in amazement. She'd thought the Golden Mane tribe's essence was just a legend. It turned out what her mother told her as a child wasn't merely a fairy tale. At that thought, Xiaorang's undefeated gaze went distant as old memories surfaced. As a child, she and her siblings would gather around their mother. Innocently curious, she once asked, "The essence of the Golden Mane tribe?" Her mother gently stroked her small head and softly said, "Yes, we wolves are descendants of the king of all beastkin, the Golden Mane tribe." The essence of the Golden Mane tribe is a legendary treasure passed down for centuries. It grants us strength and authority. Obtaining it is no easy challenge. Only those worthy can possess this precious relic. And now, the truth that she had claimed the essence. Xiaorang had traveled a rugged road to find this treasure. It sat upon a precarious rocky ledge. When she strapped it to her wrist, agonizing, death-and rebirth pain racked her body as she overcame all the trials of the inner world. Enduring those two terrors was enough proof that Xiaorang's possession of the relic was indisputable. Old memories tumbled through Xiaorang's mind. She was truly grateful to the Great Moon, her benefactor who saved her from death in a biological experiment. At the lowest point of her life, with scars on her skin and a soul ready to give up, the Great Moon was the light that redeemed Xiaorang's life. He gave her the power to avenge the Black Dragon who killed her parents. So Xiaorang solemnly vowed that she would repay that favor. Seemingly sensing her brave resolve, the essence relic in her hand flared with a powerful surge of energy. Xiaorang confidently tested the relic, convincing herself that the Great Moon would not want her to become a mediocre fighter. From now on, that said, Xiaorang paused slightly. Her eyes flashed with a wondrous light as ley energies merged into her body. She silently pledged to herself to become the strongest warrior and to revive the Golden Mane tribe by gathering its remaining members. And kill the Black Dragon with this. Saying that, Xiaorang raised the essence relic on her wrist to the sky. This relic will stand as proof of Xiaorang's oath of honor. The stream of memories closed, and Xiaorang stood motionless in the Malani desert in the dead of night. She looked up at the bright moon tonight and remembered the Great Moon. Xiaoreng's voice drifted softly on the cool breeze. It's all for him, let's begin. After saying that, Xiaoreng let out a hearty laugh. Then she trotted onward. Now in the stillness of the night at the quiet colony, only Xiaoreng's steady footsteps moved forward. This image seemed to herald the revival of the great kings of the Golden Mane Beastkin under the blue moon after 500 years. Alan was intently reading a document when Evan suddenly spoke up. "Oh right," he said, wiping his sword with a guilty look. "The Intelligence Guild has obtained information about the children. I meant to tell you at the training ground, but I forgot." Alan, not angry, calmly asked, "All right, what is it?" Evan replied, "See, Ongyang is doing very well in the settlement. She even has the nickname Golden Lightning." Alan frowned slightly. The name Golden Lightning sounded familiar. Anyway, hearing she's okay made him glad. He nodded. Indeed, in that land, strength lets you do anything. He continued to ask, "What about Day Dawn? I haven't heard from him since he said he was apprenticing at Jack's OS. Evan said they had some information about him, but were still verifying its accuracy." Alan fell silent. "Is that so?" "Oh, and Evan." He shot a suspicious look. "Aren't you very busy?" Evan glanced nervously, sweating. "Why are you staring at me like that all of a sudden? I've done everything you asked me to do." Alan advised, "You must prepare. It takes at least a month to reach the magic tower." Evan sprang up in alarm. "What, the magic tower? You never mentioned that to me." Alan stroked his chin in surprise. "I didn't say," Evan sighed. "Well, I'm used to it." He couldn't help but be puzzled. "But taking a month to reach the 6 magic towers takes only about a week." Alan replied, "We're going to the blue magic tower." Hearing that, Evan nodded. "I see, it's near the labyrinth city, so it's quite far." Finally, he stood and left the room. "I'll begin preparations immediately." Alan nodded imperceptibly. After Evan left, he flopped back into his chair and sighed. Another month in a carriage, just thinking about it made him weary. But what choice did he have? The item that could support his small precious mana core was there. Thinking of that, Alan turned and propped his chin on his hand. The labyrinth city, it brought back memories. He used to spend a lot of time grinding levels there when playing games. He closed his eyes and recalled. The labyrinth sits at the city's center as a special leveling map. Players can obtain higher quality items by leveling up and delving deeper. However, although countless players have visited the labyrinth, none have ever reached the final point. Back then, Alan had to use a cheat to reach floor 150. He couldn't help cursing, those developers were crazy, there were still more floors below. Why add more floors when no one can reach them, just to watch us suffer? Is there anything good on floor 150? Still, like in the game, achievements and relics continue to be discovered there. Thus, the profession of magical appraiser officially became popular enough to guarantee a wealthy life. Suddenly, Alan remembered Rin. She said she would soon take the appraiser exam. With her talent, she would likely pass easily. Alan suddenly thought of Rin again. She said she would soon take the appraiser exam. Back in the present, he felt a pang of guilt. Perhaps the gift he gave Rin was too little compared to others. It only worked for appraising gear. If that gift wasn't enough, he should send her separate support. A starry evening in the labyrinth city Lahania, a place not ruled by anyone. This is a city of explorers and mercenaries. In a narrow alley, after passing countless shops in a corner of the southern district, one can find a secret appraisal shop called Maerd, a quietly famous shop known for its unique services. It mainly caters to nobility and rank explorers. Among its clients was the Lord of Latania. Dai announced that the appraisal was complete. "My lord," he said, surprised. She presented the item and explained that the device uses mana to produce fire. The lord thanked her pleasantly as always. "Let me see." When he took the device, Zin guided him. "This is a relic that can be inscribed." The lord was curious. "What does being inscribed do?" She replied calmly, "With just a little mana it can sustain the flame for at least an hour." He couldn't help but laugh in admiration. "Its efficiency has improved significantly. Very good." Everything finished, the lord departed. Before stepping out, he turned back and said as usual, "Thanks as always." From behind the counter, a gentle voice replied, "You're welcome." She waited until the shop was empty of customers, before reaching up to remove her mask. Under the dim light, Juzin's beautiful face appeared, her clear emerald eyes carrying a hint of fatigue. She then turned toward another object on the shelf that looked like a small telescope. Zin picked it up and murmured, "This item can also be inscribed." Now I can understand why this tucked-away shop is so famous, because of the inscription. Rin took the item and opened the door to a room, stepping inside. It was a gift from the great moon. Moonlight poured through the window, fully illuminating an object that hovered and glowed. Seeing it, she smiled faintly. "When he first told me to become an appraiser, I couldn't understand why." Rin remembered Alan's figure. His true identity was a friend of Pan Lon from the era of the Forgotten Outer Gods. I realized that everything until now had been to destroy the dark artifacts. But at the time, she had read the letter telling her to come to the labyrinth city Latania and become a magical appraiser. At that time, she couldn't link that instruction to that goal. Nevertheless, Juzin followed the request and traveled alone to the labyrinth city. Though full of doubts, how did becoming an appraiser relate to killing dark artifacts? But what happened next changed her thinking. The moment I saw his gift, I recognized it, the Stalker's Eye. It helps quickly identify items below a certain mana threshold to assist appraisal. The moment she touched the eye, she suddenly realized it was different from what she knew. Its nature didn't even exist in the library. Then the seals surrounding the eye gradually began to vanish. The chains wrapped around it snapped open, it flared and the single eye opened. After the seal was broken, the inscription was unlocked. Above the eye appeared a series of numbers over 500. Zin thought to herself, to gain the power to fight dark artifacts, I must awaken this item. It is both an ability and a means to offer sacrifices. Now the number on the stalker's eye had changed. It displayed 248,500. She raised the telescope toward it, and a stream of golden light shot out instantly. In no time, a holy sigil appeared on the body of the telescope. Zin smiled wryly. I still have to offer 252 more items before it fully awakens. To increase the relic's stats, it will absorb something from the items, basically altering this eye. Once when she was appraising an item that displeased the eye, the previously accumulated sacrifice points were immediately wiped out. Since then, Duzin was certain of one thing. It only reacts to specific high-tier relics, and if the wrong item is offered, the accumulated points vanish. Thinking of this, she couldn't help but feel pleased. She nuzzled the eye, meticulously appraised every relic, and selected high-tier sacrificial items to hide. This is something only I can do, because I was born with the Eternal Library. Yusha held it in her hands. It was all to kill the Black Wolf, all according to the will of the Great Moon. 3 weeks later, at the Blue Magic Tower, a carriage moved silently along the stone road circling the tower. Inside, Phinia, the tower's deputy master, frowned in annoyance as she spoke. The tower master is currently absent. Make your business clear and leave. Seeing Alan say nothing, she became even more irritated. I'm busy, so speak quickly. He looked at Phinia, assessing her silently. She was a familiar face he'd seen in the main storyline. She remained deputy master because the main plot hadn't begun yet. In the game, she was a rare genius who reached octo-perfection at just 20 and became the tower's master. Speaking of the Blue Magic Tower, this magic tower was not only powerful, but also held exclusive rights to produce certain essential goods, elevating its status to that of the nobility. He felt slightly displeased. Though the power of a deputy master, one who had surpassed human limits, should be immense, her attitude was rather unpleasant. Alan still tried to introduce himself. I am Count Banla I.O. As announced, I have come to discuss the issue of the time gate. On the other side, Phinia bustled right. I still need to deliver these documents. But when he spoke, she still asked, so what's the matter? Alan calmly said, I can remove the time gate. The paper in Phinia's hand froze. The time gate is a rift linked to a mysterious subspace that appears where magic is used frequently. It spawns anomalies that cause severe damage, and unpredictable, extremely dangerous monsters that no one can foresee. She analyzed him with her eyes, then after considering, sneered, with such meager talent, what do you intend to do? Phinia didn't hesitate to wave him away. Fine, go home. Alan was puzzled. Isn't that wrong? I need an answer. She cut him off angrily. You're going to remove the time gate and seize the treasure. Yes, yes, of course you do that. Phinia slammed her hand on the table in fury and shouted, Really? Do you know how many people come here every day for that exact reason? Alan tried to persuade her. I'm serious. Take me to the time gate and I'll prove it to you. He felt wronged. Why didn't she believe him? Unbelievable. Her tone suddenly dropped. Look, I understand you need a great achievement to reverse public opinion, because people are beginning to think the only reason you became a count was luck after your brothers died. However, that doesn't give you the right to bring your personal affairs here and cause trouble. Saying this, Phinia unleashed power that trembled the space. Alan was startled and staggered backward. Evan caught him. He marveled, has such a rumor spread? Perhaps because I've lived too quietly, though it's true. She looks like a workaholic yet is astonishingly well-informed. Phinia's gaze now seemed to emit sparks of electricity, along with utter fury. Alan involuntarily shivered. She's terrifying, no joke. She puts me firmly in my place when I'm even slightly annoyed. Evan leaned close and whispered, that's only her mana. I believe we'd be snapped in two if we dared provoke her. Alan regained his composure, though he was fairly desperate, so he stepped forward to negotiate. If I cannot remove the time gate, I'll donate all my assets to the magic tower. Phinia still didn't believe him and kept spouting nonsense. I see. Alan's eyes were resolute. If you wish, I will swear an oath. This is not a bad offer for a little of your time, don't you think so? She paused at that, hesitation flashing in her eyes. After a while, Phinia led him to a door. The time gate is inside, as promised. All your assets will be mine the moment you fail, Alun said confidently. That won't happen. She leaned her head against the door and looked at him, thinking to herself, perfect timing. I was just wondering whether he's the mastermind of the domain or merely a lucky incompetent. After listening to him for a while, I believe he's the latter. Phinia sneered slightly. She judged him too. Unlike the inhuman aura around him, he only had a small core of magical power and slightly above-average energy sensing. With talent barely touching the second threshold, what can he do with that? Pathetic. In fact, the truth is there was no need to close this gate. In 3 months, it would naturally vanish after expelling the relic. The research would end there and no mage capable of closing a time gate would appear. However, the time gate in the Azure Tower of Magic had continued to cause chaos for over 2 years. Now Alan slowly stepped closer to the cracking time gate. Phinia shrugged as a warning, if you can't do anything, just leave the room. He ignored her words and began weaving hand signs. She frowned in doubt. You intend to use your hands as a conduit instead of a staff. Even the ancient spellbooks classify that. It's a primitive method, something almost only found in fairy tales. Phinia couldn't help but disdainfully try to stop him. For God's sake, stop copying and leave. Alan paid no heed and began to chant. Suddenly, the surroundings went pitch black. She turned pale, cold sweat ran down her nose. I can't move. No, everything has stopped moving. Phinia quickly cast Mana Na into her eyes, trying to see what was around her. In front of her, a gigantic crimson eye was tightly shut. In the blink of an eye, that eye opened. The The pupil was a deep blood red, as if it could gouge into Fenia's soul. She focused on observing those mysterious circles and pondered, something unknown. Seeing its nature was simple, this must not be allowed to happen. Raise a hand to touch something, stop the thought, cut them off, what is understood must never be realized. Cut off your thoughts, really. The red eye kept staring unblinkingly. After a while, a gigantic hand gently reached toward Fenia, prompting a fleeting thought. An absolute command, she widened her eyes. Her face was now dotted with sweat from fear. I understand the command. The eye constricted, then tightly shut, leaving Fenia deeply unsettled as she looked up. She stood frozen in place, not knowing what to do next. Suddenly, Alan spoke, making Fenia startle. The gate had closed. No sooner had he finished than he picked something up and mused to himself. That was as easy as turning my hand. All I needed were the item and a special method. Then Alan said, I'll take the relic that the gate expelled. He looked at Fenia and contemplated. I need to use it a few more times, so I used a persuasion charm. Will she believe me? Fenia's face was terrified. She stammered, yes, I won't tell anyone. Alan, dejected, thought her expression meant his bluff had failed. He stepped toward Fenia. I'm very grateful, but it's unnecessary. She recoiled in fear and quickly shouted, yes, I will keep absolute secrecy, I won't tell anyone. Terrified, she kept backing away and screamed, I can keep a secret, really, I'm serious. Alan still didn't understand, standing puzzled. Why is she suddenly acting like this? He turned away and called for Evan, let's go home. Before they could leave, Alan looked back after hearing a voice, please wait a moment. Fenia immediately opened the medicine box and held it out before him. This is a mana recovery potion I made myself, please take it. Alan picked up a vial and examined it, a potion personally crafted by the Deputy Tower Lord, and it's even a superior grade one. Fenia asked, do you like it? Alan wore a thoughtful look. These two bottles are worth as much as several lower grade ones combined. I checked the price and nearly choked when I saw it. Then Alan wondered aloud, does she appreciate me closing the gate that much? Fenia blanched in embarrassment. That was at the Count's request, I will keep absolute silence. Really? Suddenly she spoke mischievously. Of course, a solemn oath. Should I swear a magical oath? Alan was exasperated. Does a trivial thing like this really need an oath? After a moment he said, wait a second, then thought to himself that she seemed to be misunderstanding something. Suddenly many chains fell from nowhere around where they were standing, and quickly bound them tightly. Fenia once again shouted, see, I keep my promises very well. Alan exhaled and replied, I understand. He then thought sullenly that she showed no sign of resolving the misunderstanding. In an instant, at the Azure Tower, he had obtained the relic he wanted, 5 potions and an oath. Early the next morning, before a magnificent tower, Evan stared at the item Alan wore on his wrist and asked, is that the treasure that fell from the gate? Hard to retrieve, but it looks more primitive than I expected. Does it perform well? Alan gently touched the item and answered, well, in any case, this is something I absolutely need. He gazed at the object. The seal was irreverent. Yes, I retrieved it safely. The gem set in the bracelet can absorb and store mana from the air. The trinket on Alan's wrist suddenly glowed, prompting him to exclaim that it worked well. He then fell into thought. The storage capacity wasn't large, but with his mana core it was more than enough. Afterward, Alan looked into the distance, a body with less mana than even a support item. He resolved firmly that his goal was to research magic and protect himself, not to fight. Alan sat in a corner nodding, this will be enough. He then recalled Fenia and wondered, by the way, what exactly did Fenia misunderstand? Alan suddenly remembered that abrupt, polite demeanor. It was strange. He thought of Fenia. Please come in. Alan turned to introduce himself. Let me be clear, I am a second-rank mage. Fenny, she replied warmly, I know, you seem exactly like a second-rank mage. Hearing that, Alan was bewildered. Was she mocking him? Returning to reality, he sat silently pondering. This reaction was similar to Kalia's last time. He again recalled the image of Kalia. Over here, Fenia forced a smile, still feeling uneasy. Alan looked out the window and thought, after all, he probably wouldn't see any of them again, so it should be fine. Bright sunlight shone down below, a carriage rolled by with voices calling. Lovely weather, someone responded. Yes, so peaceful. Outside, the Altia Duchy was utterly quiet. Leah held a cup of tea and gently said, long time no see. I hope you have a pleasant time, Miss Jusnonia. Kalia smiled and replied, of course, nothing about you has changed. I'm truly glad to see you again. Leah coquettishly said, it's convenient that we don't have to discuss rank or power with each other. Kalia added on. The broad vision of Count Palacio once again amazed everyone. She remembered Alan and thought that attending the Duchy Altia's visit might be a good idea. Kalia pondered. After taking his advice, she quickly grasped his true intent. That evening, during their conversation, both realized they were inferior to Palladia. Logia's and Kalia's faces gaped in surprise. Whatever the reason, this was an alliance built on Count Paulo's orders. Alan's majestic image made the struggle for power meaningless when standing beneath the absolute number one. 2 badges also appeared. Zenonia and Adiana had become more comfortable allies. Logia wondered the conference was next month. Why visit today? Kalia explained. The Count sent a letter using my visit as an excuse. Logia gently opened the letter. I wonder what's inside. The letter discussed talks with noble families. It read, Miss, I hope you are well. Regarding your previous visit, some nobles have complained to me about it. Therefore, there are not many nobles suitable for me. Please understand. Kalia said it sounded like an ordinary apology letter, but Logia added that surely there was some hidden plot inside. Kalia agreed at once. Yes, I think we should discuss it, and so the two talked together. Not many nobles suitable for me. Baron K. Fenia belonged to the noble faction, and Viscount Montino was a key figure of the royal faction. Count Bylander belonged to the royal faction. Duke Fandy was a key figure of the noble faction among the nobles he spoke with at the ball. Finally, Kalia summed up bluntly, he dislikes both the noble and royal factions. Horrifying thought. Does that mean he wants to kill them all? Leah calmly said, we should draw conclusions based on reason. Kalia quickly replied, I agree. Leah slowly said, then she emphasized that he wants to eliminate the current noble. Realizing this, both went pale with fear. Logia stared and said, that's what it means. Kalia, also terrified, added that he would create a new regime. Logia resentfully looked up at the sky. That's why Altia needs her reputation and elevation to do. The atmosphere was a bit awkward. If the Western Overlord were beside him, Kalia would certainly resist, it seemed so. The two then said we should discuss a plan. Meanwhile, at the Azure Tower a voice rang out. Count Balladio, do you mean he resembles the Stargate? Fenia tiredly sprawled across the table. Yes, the Tower Lord asked curiously, tell me the details. She looked up and sighed. And so the puzzle pieces were formed randomly, moved chaotically, and then fit into place. Over here, Evan asked anxiously, are you all right? Alan put his hand to his mouth and replied, I suddenly choked on a sweet potato. He spoke calmly though still uncomfortable. Evan brought him water and said, here's some water. Alan took it and thanked him. He wore a sad, dejected expression. I want to go home so badly. Then he thought the letter from Yusha would arrive soon. The sky grew dim. Beneath a statue of the goddess, Yusha stood motionless. Then she gently smiled with a bashful face. Cut to the Azure Tower. At that moment someone's voice rang out. Oh, Fenia dear, my disciple, I have returned. He had just returned and looked around. Strange, I can no longer sense the presence of the time gate. This man was the master of the Azure Tower, Grand Mage Eightfold Sioam Kato. Seeing her like that, he wondered if something had occurred while he was away. Across from him, Fenia answered in a small, fawning voice, Tower Lord, you have finally returned. I have completed every task you assigned. Seeing her demeanor, the Tower Lord was a bit surprised. Fenia, what's the matter? CM asked, but Fenia didn't even bother to answer. This made him ponder inwardly. The girl wasn't raging at him as she usually did. What on earth happened? Because Fenia had long held the Deputy Tower Lord position thanks to her innate talent since childhood, her ego and arrogance had soared to the skis. Surely she just made some new recruit burst into tears again. Even so, I never intended to reform that temperament because her passion for magic is utterly pure. Once she reaches the 7th circle, she'll understand that past achievements mean little and will naturally rein herself in. That's why her current composure seemed truly strained. CM stepped forward to console her, saying, listen, my northern assignment kept me away for quite a while. Has the backlog of work while I was gone overwhelmed you? She turned to the Tower Lord with a pleading look. After a moment, CM finally understood everything, so the Count sealed the time gate. But because you've sworn an oath, you can't reveal the exact method he used, can you? In response, she only shook her head slightly. After all, there weren't many details to recount about the sealing process. That was all she could report. For some reason, her sorrowful appearance seemed to amuse CM somewhat. Could it be that something inexplicable magic had made Fenia humble? Or more precisely, was it primordial magic? She was so frightened she no longer even resisted when I touched her. Count Palatino of the Kingdom of Ea, intriguing. This is a person I need to pay attention to. Time quickly passed, and the scene shifted to the protagonist's location. It had been a month since leaving the Azure Tower. After seizing the relic from the Irreverent One, I began to study sigils deeply and seriously, because my daily mana usage limit had since increased. Important note, the rules for operating sigils and spells will break if the following criteria are not met. Do not use irrational magics, do not repeat the same element, and use at most 4 spell types. Combining similar phrase clusters can create resonance effects. I've discovered that a given sigil seems to require a scientifically prearranged layout. I surmised this, and as a result I grasped a new operating principle of polymorphic sigil clusters. This may relate to the technique and positions where I set the spell operations. However, it's not yet fully certain. Evan happened to pass by and approached to ask, each time I witness it your magic seems stronger than before. My Lord Count, is that so? Alan sighed in exasperation. Previously it bore no resemblance to a second-rank mage's level, but now it seemed on a completely different scale than a few months ago. I think a mundane gravity spell couldn't create such a deep pit. He then pondered silently that gravity is only a second-rank spell. Even at maximum output, it shouldn't be able to crush an entity that way. I once thought I was gradually getting stronger. Was that impression mistaken? If there is a real cause for such a power surge, it surely isn't due to proficiency or the sigils alone. After all, improving mastery only raises precision and practical casting ability. Sigils serve as trigger keywords to alter properties. I spent months analyzing the sigil matrix for gravity, and recently substituted nearly synonymous phrase clusters for one another. Finally, I realized that power only increases when the optimal arrangement is found. It's not merely an illusion, otherwise it's absurd. There is no basis for a spell's destructive force to surge so suddenly. Perhaps my condition has simply been at its best lately. Evan, casually amused, then pulled out a letter and said, I dropped by to deliver a letter from Yusha to you. It just arrived. Alan nodded. Thank you. Thanks, Evan. I'll return to my room and ponder it when I have free time. Oh, are you going to the study now? Yes, I've already used up all 3 of my daily spell casts today. The protagonist replied, walking and thinking. What root cause suddenly boosted my power? Could it be a benefit gained from a curse? That curse would be an ancient Eastern ritual where the caster accepts self-sacrifice to harm others or themselves. When bearing the curse, the subject suffers damage but simultaneously gains compensatory power. But there is no one here versed in Eastern occult arts so that possibility is ruled out. Or is it the power of faith? But from account of a small state forgotten by the underworld, that sounds absurd. Well, sometimes I should just set aside my worries and carry on with life. After all, nothing terrible comes from that, right? Meanwhile, in the realm of Joseji, the capital Gyeoneo, a pristine city where residents worship Sizonia, the goddess of moonlight and peace, at the Eastern Chapel. While Yusha was praying there, a knight approached from behind and said, "Greetings, sister." Seemingly guessing who it was, Yusha gently turned and replied, "Sir Knightlok, how have you been?" At that moment, Lok thought to himself, "She is a nun of lower rank than a holy knight, not even entitled to wear the blessing sash. Yet I must still maintain a respectful attitude." With that, the knight bowed and began his report. "Yes, in this operation we rescued 8 children and 25 civilians from a remote village on the east-west border. This success is thanks to you, sister." Yusha shook her head, refusing to accept the credit. "Not at all, you are the one who performed those noble deeds." Lok replied that it was she who enlightened someone as ignorant as him. "I will always be grateful for that. For 20 years I sank into despair because I could not sense any divine power at all. I almost gave up entirely." As he spoke, he recalled his former self. While Lok sat panting like an ox after training, Yusha's voice rang not far away. "If there is something you crave so much, try placing your faith in the moon." The moon, he wondered in desperate doubt. Yusha said little, answering only with an enigmatic sentence. "You will understand much after you actually do it." Back in the knight's thoughts, he was so desperate he was willing to try any method. "I sincerely prayed to the moon for many days, just as she instructed. Then I was miraculously able to use divine power. I was overjoyed, but because of that I fell prey to a fleeting temptation, placing my faith in the moon rather than the goddess Sizonia. I feared I was being led into heresy. However, all sources of power borrowed from the divine share the same nature. Even holy relics blessed in the goddess's name shone in human form when I touched them. That was clear evidence of the divine power I possessed. But why did you advise me to trust the moon, sister?" In response, Yusha began to enlighten him. "Faith arises from an invisible belief and takes much time to manifest. It is always easier to seek what you need in things that are tangibly before you. That moon will always watch over and support you." Not sure if he was under some charm, but Lok agreed as if it were obvious. "I understand. Because the goddess herself is the symbol of the moon. This is a way for those full of doubt to find an absolute anchor for their deepest desires." He bowed in gratitude. "Sister, I sincerely thank you from the bottom of my heart." Back in the present, Yusha spoke. "If you want to show your gratitude, let's perform the prayer ritual together." Lok replied, placing his hand on his chest. "I'm willing to do it as many times as needed." "You arrive just in time. The ceremony is about to begin and everyone has gathered." Yusha led Lok into the cathedral, which had drawn countless people. She slowly walked to the center of the cathedral, while Lok found a place to sit. "Now let us pray together. The moon shines clearer today than ever. Everyone turn your faces to the great moon." Back to the protagonist. Alan held the letter Yusha had sent and sighed wearily. Today's letter was nothing special, mostly just everyday matters. That meant everyone was living fine, which was good, indeed. But the fact that no one else wrote to me except Yusha, despite everyone doing well, made me a little sad. From their perspective, it's understandable. I'm just a distant uncle they've never met, so perhaps I'm merely a kind stranger passing through. Anyway, I'd achieved my goal of guiding them onto the right path so they wouldn't destroy the world, so there was no reason to be sad. No reason at all. Alan's heart wavered a bit. Yusha must be very busy. Yet she still writes to me regularly. I raised 5 children, but in the end only the eldest acknowledged my efforts. Just as Alan was quietly tearing up inside, his friend Evan suddenly spoke up. "Count, are you busy?" Evan suddenly asked, making Alan jump. "Hey, you're still here." He didn't need to fetch any paper and said, "Ah yes, I just received some news about the children from the Information Guild, so I wanted to report to you right away. About that person you asked about last time. He's become a pirate now." This news left the protagonist full of question marks. A few seconds later he stammered, "Can you elaborate?" So the two of them went out to the tea table and sat down. Evan the guard recounted the information he'd gathered. First, the most talked about person is Xiaoring. And Xiaoring has achieved a 32-win streak out of 100 matches. That's the requirement for her to become a 3-star AG. Hearing that, Alan suddenly asked back, "A 32-win streak? Wait, the fighter with the longest streak is?" Before he could finish, Evan nodded. "The Lion King with a 41-win streak." By now, Alan couldn't help but admire him. The Lion King is an extremely powerful figure who once briefly joined a player's party. This colony relies on many powerful individuals to showcase its military strength, and she's about to surpass the colony's top figure. Unaware of his thoughts, Evan continued reporting more. As for Deus, his order executed one of the 8 Manjica leaders in the snowy region. The leader of those who transform into monsters through rituals. You know them, right? As for the protagonist, of course he would take interest in that plot. He thought to himself, I know them very well. Back when I was in the game, I had to fight the Mandai tribe and slay their god. Ulan touched. Lucky that I don't have to face them now because Ulan only appears when the 5 great sins assemble, an extremely difficult encounter. Thinking that, Alan relaxed. Looks like I don't need to worry about Ulan anymore. Evan cheerfully agreed. With this, he's now considered on par with the #1 sword. Knowing that the kid I sponsor became so strong, Alan began planning to latch onto him. Maybe I really should go meet him, could be lucrative. Not paying attention to the protagonist's fantasies, Evan added, "And Rin, you've become an appraiser who can now engrave black patterns on artifacts to enhance their power. Such a thing exists. Fascinating. Maybe she's doing well in her own way." Alan nodded in response, but his tone began to change. So the crux is that that person really did become a pirate. Realizing they'd reached the main point, Evan's expression grew more serious. "Speaking of that, have you heard of the Seven Isles off the coast of Raxus? At the Seven Isles where great pirates dwell." He became the captain of the first isle, the largest island. At that, Alan seemed to collapse from disappointment. "Impossible. An online post I once laughed off has now become my reality. I didn't send it to Raxus for that reason. That person is excellent at detecting enemies, and because they're a rare sea deity, they can move freely underwater. The Raxus Sea also holds many valuable relics, so I advised them to become a treasure hunter, a promising profession. I used to specialize in finding enemies too." Seeing Alan so desperate, Evan tried to console him. "The captain of a great pirate crew is practically the lord of that island. Now he's become an extremely important figure." "Probably so," Alan replied, but his despairing expressions did not lessen. He couldn't stop wondering how exactly that person had removed the captain of the First Isles. All the captains are skilled people, and none had ever lost a naval battle to anyone. Maybe they only plundered the truly valuable items among the relics of the old era. I also wanted to obtain a top-tier relic, so I had to grind many hours as a treasure hunter. So they armed themselves to seize the captain's position. I know the world doesn't always go my way, but this is bitter. Is this what it feels like to have a child become a pirate? Thinking that made Alan turn pale, as if he could go sell salt at any moment, which made Evan so scared he nearly wet himself. "Count, are you okay?" Scene shifts to the massive port city of Raxus. Across the city's bay is the pirate heaven, and the largest of them is the First Isle. The great pirate, the Red Slayer, was once the captain of this place. He used wealth to buy the protection of the Heaven's King, and this is the person who defeated him to become the new captain of the First Isles. At that, the person revealed a very displeased expression. "I just don't know, what is the Great Moon? I never cared much, so I never really thought deeply about it. At first he was just someone I was grateful to. I should have died like a slave cut up, but thanks to him I met Yusha and awakened my power. Honestly, I feel like I'm following Yusha's orders while working as Lam and Gaiet. So when I received a direct order from dying Gaiet, I really couldn't comprehend it. What does becoming a treasure hunter even mean? It even fills me with a sense of disgust. I need to start my revenge as soon as possible. Those black things, they massacred an entire tribe. We were living peacefully on an island nobody even knew about. On the continent, we were lucky enough to escape to. Those damned hunters killed my parents when they were exhausted, and sold me off like a slave. I don't think becoming a treasure hunter and that gift have anything to do with my vow of revenge. On the very day the rope first set foot here, it seems at least I should pretend to obey the order. Why is it so noisy over there?" The rope noticed the nearby ship. The wanted posters only then appeared on the board behind them. "You immediately used your ability to probe. Those who destroyed everything of the rope are all here." A man with a scarred face sneered and said, "Only the great pirate chosen can receive the protection of the Heavenly King through riches. The selected captains of the Seven Isles are eternal." By this point, the rope could no longer hold back its murderous intent. "I had found the bastards who killed my parents. Finally, they have gained power, huh? That Heavenly King is deliberately spreading lies, that only through a sacred ritual using parts from the sea god's body can one receive the power granted by the sea god Kori. And every captain of the Seven Isles once held that power. They are celebrating, unaware the catastrophe is about to strike. Those damned hunters tore my parents' bodies into 7 or 8 pieces. The rope's fury erupted. On the night of the fireworks, Raiden stood high on the gloomy ship watching the scene. Waves kept crashing. He gloomily wondered to himself, how could he have known? Raiden mouthed, "Even though I never told him." He looked at the beautiful ship out there and thought, as if the great moon were fulfilling a promise, and had arranged the chance for revenge at this perfect moment. Raiden clenched his hands, trembling, thinking, "But with our strength, we probably can't fight them right now." He recalled those people because they possessed the power of the sea god. At that memory, Raiden suddenly paused to consider, if it was all planned from the start. Raiden raised his pendant and murmured, "Then this gift must have its reason." Raiden held the pendant high under the moonlight surrounding the boat. The great moon had already arranged everything, and he clasped the chain reverently with both hands. Raiden always understood that the board and the foundations for retaliation had been laid out. Then the young man, eyes full of grief, pressed the pendant to his forehead, his resolve ignited. The next day the sea rippled a lush green, the small islands were verdant with rows of tall coconut palms, and a youth's feet ran swiftly across the islet's grass. Raiden plunged straight down from above into the sea without hesitation, his whole body dropping into the surrounding waters. Among the waves and clear spray, the young man saw the familiar pendant. Raiden's eyes suddenly lit up when he saw it. The pendant fit perfectly around the young man's neck, the gift from the great moon, that orange revealing lens. Raiden recalled that the orange revealing lens helped him locate relics sunk deeper on the seabed, and some finds would be enough to make up the power he lacked. Raiden swam down, diving deeper toward the treasure on the seabed. That day, as dusk fell over the sea, Raiden had strapped to his neck the items he had found under the sea. Walking, Raiden muttered, "Just a thank you, I really was foolish." Raiden hugged Yang treasure up toward the sky. The great moon had kept its promise. He reflected on what had happened, not only bringing the target of revenge before him, but also granting him the power to retaliate. Raiden murmured, the mission in that letter is finally all understood. What was your true intention? Raiden swept his hair back boldly, restating that your aim was to carry out revenge and conquer the Seven Islands. Elsewhere, Yusha sat and spoke casually, am I right? Then don't forget all of that, O Supreme One of Raiden's place. He continued the sentence, was the great moon's greatness those words. What once seemed meaningless gradually became a light of faith. Raiden hummed to himself. Everything was engraved deeply in his heart because of the great moon. Raiden stood by the shore holding the treasure aloft. The moon gradually slipped below the horizon. 3 months later, the oppressive heat began to dissipate and autumn arrived, bringing the Asteria festival held every 2 years. Alon Palacio sat in the carriage, musing to himself that he had been dragged along against his will. He asked, are companions required to attend only once every 4 years? It's really annoying. Carriages followed one another, racing forward. Even sitting opposite, answered Alon Palacio. According to schedule, the crowd in Edorn House's carriages have already arrived to rendezvous. He nodded. Oh, is that so? Alon Palacio pondered inwardly. Having to travel in a large convoy for fear of bandits is such a nuisance. What kind of weird culture is this? It's maddening. Time passed quickly and the day was nearly over. Alon Palacio sat in the inn holding a mug of beer. But only in the evening did he realize that 2 troublesome nobles had come running up to pester him with nonsense. Count Palacio, having only 1 guard accompanying you is a bit much, isn't it? Did you get your title by chance and run out of funds? Alon Palacio stared at the scene in frustration. The problem isn't bandits, it's these nobles. He used his plate to cover his helpless face. They're so gleefully taunting, go somewhere else and gossip behind my back and be done with it. Actually, this wasn't unfamiliar to Alon Palacio. He had once been a legendary bastard whose power dominated the entire eastern underworld, built on mountains of loot taken from that world. Alon Palacio recalled his own background, but having grown content with his current life, he had washed his hands of it and now lived comfortably. What's the difficulty? He no longer involved himself in the dangerous underworld affairs. Alon Palacio regarded those scheming nobles like hunting dogs. Because of that, the eastern underworld had become a mine for those squabbling shrimp to fight over. And the rumor that I became count not by ability but by luck. Alon Palacio tilted his head, thinking it had nearly become true. The baseless gossip about backing for the Count's family had quieted and been reduced to calling him a lucky bastard. He knew that well. Those 2 nobles ran up and bragged in front of him. How pathetic. Surely their purses are empty, right? Sob sob, if you say the word, I am always willing to give charity. Alon Palacio wondered helplessly, surprised they dared mock him to his face. You're grown adults acting like children, what lunatics. Alon Palacio looked at the 2 nobles with some curiosity, but thought they'd clearly crossed the line. But at that moment a thought occurred to him. Ah, this is the festival of Palacio's victims. Ah, this is the festival of Palacio's victims. Alon Palacio recalled those ranks Palacio crowd Edorn, those who had once been used by Palacio like mobile wallets. And in reality, now they were venting all the frustrations they'd once endured. They were crazily unleashing their anger without restraint. Alon Palacio sat there helplessly wondering. Was he the one who had made them drunk and started this from the beginning? Alon Palacio sighed and endured, feeling like he was facing a bunch of provocateurs who just loved to taunt, probably a total blocker. At that moment, Even stepped outside and asked in surprise, oh, still not done ganging up, admirable persistence. He shook his head and ignored them. The best approach is to pretend it doesn't matter. Even, where did you come from? He replied in surprise. Oh, they were handing these out in the kitchen. Even held out what he was carrying and said, it's roasted corn. Alon Palacio exclaimed, oh, that looks tasty. He sat nibbling the roasted corn beside Even, thinking to himself that this simple famine relief food was his favorite, especially on a cold night like this. Perfect. Thinking back, the once massive underworld army probably couldn't be maintained and was disbanded, right? The carriage doesn't seem well maintained either. Oh well, never mind. He glanced back at the 2 nobles. They sounded like quite the power couple, planning to form an alliance. Alon Palacio and Even sat enjoying the roasted corn, praising it. Delicious. With a bit of butter spread on it, it would be perfect. Meanwhile, at the northern region, the eternally frozen land had been conquered by the Mandai tribes, as if no living thing remained, leaving only a gray curse enshrouding everything. The one-armed man struggled to drag himself across the pure white snow. As he moved, he left streaks of blood staining the snow. The maimed man cursed in pain and fury. Damn Caliburns, they know nothing of honor. He was one of the 8 great chieftains of the Mandai Klkan. And for the Mandai, who revered combat, death on the battlefield was the greatest glory and dignity. But this time was different. He had fallen into the trap of that knight Caliburn who had challenged him and was defeated by his cowardly, treacherous strike. The chieftain coughed up a mouthful of poisonous blood. He lay sprawled and weak, coughing harshly. That chieftain lay on the white snow, groaning helplessly. If this continues, what will become of the Snow Plains station? Snow continued to fall relentlessly across the frigid north, burying the chieftain ever deeper beneath the cold drifts. He lay there calling out in his fatting breaths. Klkan was too proud to die quietly at the threshold of death. The cold snow fell thickly, his eye sockets bled without stop. Oh, my flesh and blood. Amid the icy north a voice rang out, call my name. That voice echoed around the chieftain, shout my great title. The sound commanded the name you have always venerated. The chieftain groaned and called the name. He whispered the name Ultultus. The chieftain's body grew weaker. He cried and whispered to the snow, Great One. His remaining hand tried to prop him up as he forced himself to sit. The great chieftain turned his body upward and shouted, I supreme deity Ultultus. He pleaded toward Ultultus, I dare to call your name. Ultultus smiled approvingly. Good, if so I will fulfill your desire. The caravan escorting Alon Palacio continued on to the Rotter family's grand banquet. While en route to the social gathering, the sweet comforts of middle-aged life continued. Despite other houses participating, the taunts never ceased. The two nobles Krailed and Edorn drunk mocked Alon Palacio with singing and dancing. What just that and it becomes a topic? It's pathetic enough to make me cry. Alon Palacio dryly told himself, we just need to ignore them and not give them the satisfaction. That's the minimum courtesy of a gamer who has snagged a fat target. After traveling a while longer, the convoy stopped. We'll stay here tonight. Victory belonged to the one who ignored and the one who desperately tried to provoke. The two nobles Krailed and Edorn fumed, shouting at that bastard for constantly snubbing them. Unbelievable. Krailed and Edorn exchanged looks and asked each other, how's the escort reinforcement looking? I checked with an item, it's only that brat in the night Duan. Daring to sit at the same table as the nobility, Alon Palacio, biting into his corn, exclaimed, it's too hot. Even called worriedly, let me blow on it for you. The two sighed and accepted. Looks like the rumor that they're useless is true. The two nobles Krailed and Edorn conferred, then it's time to launch the plan to take over the underworld. We no longer need to show deference to the Palacios. They grinned malignantly at each other, saying vast wealth and power circulate in the underworld, and finally we will taste it ourselves. If we seize the underworld, we should give him a present, shouldn't we? Krailed and Edorn gleefully painted futures, intent on teaching him the brutal taste of this world in a way he'll remember. Ha ha, you're rather generous. As they laughed, they heard a rustling. When they turned toward the sound, they screamed. Krailed and Edorn pointed tremblingly that way and shouted, monsters. Some people ran inside, others rushed out to fight. The guarding mages in front fired a flare up into the sky, signaling danger to the entire convoy. The signal flare carried weapons and a beacon aimed at the monster's location, Kaheka. The members of the convoy recognized goblins and breathed a sigh of relief, saying, huh, what is this? Just goblins. These are the weak monsters commonly found in forests. But they suddenly realized another thing. What if their numbers are enough to sweep everything away? The whole convoy went blank-faced at the sight. The monsters bore heavy weapons as they advanced. The convoy on its way to the grand banquet frowned and cried out, damn it, the sentries outside are all dead. What on earth is going on? Many members stammered, I've never seen goblins like this before. Their size is different. Is this a new mutation? Moreover, they're saturated with magic like this, which meant both sides sprang up ready for battle. But the strength gap between them was obvious. Their physique was nothing like anything they'd known. The monsters, tireless, attacked incessantly. They struck where the humans were, sending earth and rock flying. The humans did not relent and immediately countered. The beasts scrambled across the ground in chaos, consolidating their strength. The beasts scrambled across the ground in chaos, gathering strength. They stopped, looked around, and cried, Kek, kick, the monsters have gathered in one place now. The mages and knights debated. The threefold mage stone wall and the twofold magic are done. Only one supporting mage remains. Who is he? At that moment, Alon Palacio appeared and issued an empowerment command. The knights and mages turned to look at the one who had just struck. A light halted at a point and then began to spiral forward continuously. Alon Palacio thrust his hand in a punch. With the pressure, the monsters cried out Kaheka. They could not escape the circle of empowerment. The sound Kaheka continued ringing. A large horde of monsters was trapped inside the empowerment sphere. The human group, bothered by the mist, recoiled to the rear. Alon Palacio strode nonchalantly toward the sphere. He clenched both fists, pressing hard to create a vacuum. A high-intensity light emanated from between Alon Palacio's hands. Earth, stone, and blocks of light began to explode and fall everywhere. Alon Palacio spoke another primal command. The ring on Alon Palacio's arm lit up in increments like a bar representing power. The empowerment sphere then detonated, scattering the monsters. Alon Palacio remained calmly standing there, observing everything. The two nobles Krailed and Edorn gaped in disbelief at the scene. The mages and knights were also stunned, unable to believe it. Alon Palacio turned and reminded everyone, don't just stand there, get ready to move. Everyone quickly rallied and prepared to fight the approaching monsters. Humans and monsters charged at each other. Alon Palacio swung his arm to support the mages. Countless foremost slashes from his hand were unleashed at the monsters. Those slashes struck accurately without harming humans. Even fighting looked on in amazement. Time passed on for a while. The brave humans continued to fight without retreating. Neither side stopped until dawn. After it fell quiet, those who had hidden in safety ran out joyfully, shouting, it's over, it's finished. The mages and knights panted heavily, tired but immensely relieved and proud. All eyes turned toward Alon Palacio, and everyone wondered about that person. Seeing Alon Palacio in armor, everyone questioned who he really was. But no one knew his face had gone ashen. He had nearly died. This was trouble. Alon Palacio looked down at the special ring on his hand. Although his daily uses of magic had increased, it was only 3 or 4 times. In battle, he was still just an ordinary man with a meager mana core. Even ran up and asked, Count, are you hurt anywhere? Alon Palacio nodded and replied, I'm fine. He still looked pale, thinking that even here, losing the ability to protect himself was truly terrifying. Even asked in confusion for confirmation, are you really okay? He answered, I'm fine. Alon Palacio thought, I was so annoyed at first I planned to go alone, but it's fortunate I chose to travel with the nobles. But this soul crystal is the bigger problem. How could it have appeared? Spirit crystallization is a strange phenomenon that occurs when an evil god is about to descend. The affected monsters become more ferocious, and their physical strength increases. Alon Palacio moved and pondered, how could this happen? It shouldn't be like this. He remained puzzled by a few things. Clearly, this should only happen when the 5 great sins are born. Have the world's rules collapsed so far that those evil gods can appear? And does this herald that they will soon descend upon this land? Alon Palacio clenched his head in helplessness at the thought. The youngsters haven't awakened the power of the 5 great sins yet, so why? What on earth is happening? That day, Alon Palacio set everything aside and decided to gather information as soon as they arrived. He glanced back and observed, if this situation keeps happening, sooner or later our heads will be off our shoulders. The 2 nobles behind still hadn't recovered, clutching their heads, pale and speechless. The next day, the Rodiger Alon Palacio household arrived, gloomy from the long journey. He groaned with exhaustion, finally reaching their destination. Because the entire party had met one trouble after another, the curtain on the grand social banquet had been lifted. Even sat behind, rubbing Alon Palacio's shoulders and neck. He complained, wanting to go home and have a good sleep. The grand social banquet inside gathered countless nobles, all refined and elegant, but it was merely a painted facade. Alon Palacio looked around, sizing up the Lauder family's feast. While all this decoration is gold, it must have been expensive, right? Even sipped his wine and boredly criticized, deliberately flaunting wealth. Maybe I could take a piece and no one would notice. The red gilded look was so tacky and provincial. While Alon Palacio was lost in thought, he heard a voice from afar. My God, Duke Lauder really is extraordinary. The Lauder noble laughed delightedly and replied, it's because my little bird won't leave me alone, isn't it? The other nobles smiled and advised, oh dear Duke, please take care of your health. The more Alon Palacio watched these scenes, the more disgusted he felt, thinking to himself, making peace with those nobles brings nothing good. I don't want any involvement. Better to step back a bit. But at that moment, someone targeted him. Over there, Alon Palacio felt unbelievably unlucky. Just as he intended to avoid trouble, the 2 nobles Kraeld and Edorn, fawning, approached to speak. Ho ho ho, Count Palacio, could you spare a moment? They produced an offering and placed it before him. This is premium meat from my domain, would you like to try it? I intend to support your domain, what do you think? Alon Palacio tilted his head in confusion. What's this, why all of a sudden? Seeing his expression, Kraeld and Edorn trembled with worry. At the Count's expression, they inwardly panicked and feared the worst. Kraeld and Edorn tried to reassure each other but shouldn't have been so flustered. Rewind to the day before, after the battle with the goblins. Did you just see that? Was that magic? Kraeld and Edorn clutched their heads in confusion, looking toward Alon Palacio and Even. One turned to the other and asked, did you just see that? Was it magic? Kraeld and Edorn ran to call Lord Cayman. Lend me your sorcerer for a moment, I have some questions to trouble him with. The one pulled along was the 3-tiered sorcerer that Baron Amen had brought to show off. The 3-tiered sorcerer awkwardly held his wand and asked, what is it? The nobles panicked and asked, that surge of mana just now. They recalled the terrifying power from earlier and couldn't help but be horrified. They trembled as they probed, that was only 2nd tier, right? The 3-tiered sorcerer pondered. Huh, 2nd tier. Then she denied it, leaving the 2 dumbfounded. How could it be 2nd tier? Definitely not. He's on a level far above me, so 3rd tier or higher. Kraeld and Edorn cried, wondering, becoming Count Palacio by luck. Don't be ridiculous. They had witnessed that power, no guards needed. The look in Alon Palacio's eyes when he returned during that magical battle still haunted them. They thought of him as cold and ruthlessly merciless at his core. Therefore, now they tried to save their lives through bribery. There was no other way, it had come to this. Kraeld and Edorn decided they must bow. I was willing to be rude to Lord Palacio. I had sunk so deeply into delusional fantasies that I lost my mind. Both of them pleaded, please have mercy. Even walked up to Alon Palacio bewildered and asked, what is this? You followed me all the way here to say this. He wearily wondered, what on earth is going on? I still don't understand any of it. Even put a hand on his shoulder and offered to deal with them. He shook his head, there's no point wasting effort. He sighed, recalling that no matter how open this nation is, this had crossed the line of what could be ignored. Alon Palacio replied to Even, let me handle it. Even if I don't have that level of power, just scare them as much as possible. Then Alon Palacio narrowed his eyes to try to play the role of a cruel man. The 2 nobles, Kraeld and Edorn, fell to their knees in terror on the banquet hall floor. They grabbed each other's hands and cried, we're done for, this is worse than death. After that, the banquet continued on in a fake, lively manner. Alon Palacio looked around once and sent Even to the Intelligence Guild. I'll try digging up information on those nobles. Alon Palacio picked up a pastry, nibbling it while listening to the nobles talk. Oh, those 2 seemed to be discussing something secret. The 2 nearby nobles stood in a corner talking. Alon Palacio tried to eavesdrop. He considered enhancing his hearing with mana, but that would be excessive. One noble asked, have you heard about Duke Althea and Count Zenonia? Alon Palacio was shocked to hear this. Of course, I heard they're about to form an alliance, right? Even the prospect of that alliance was strange. He munched the pastry and thought, what's the big deal? That's nothing to worry about. Alon Palacio clicked his tongue at the 2. After all, the families backing those two already disliked each other. That alliance probably won't last long. Then he nibbled his favorite piece of pastry. Alon Palacio exclaimed, "The tea is excellent, this shop is a gem, and on top of that there's even more earth-shaking news." Don't gape when you hear this. Those two nobles kept talking, their leader wasn't one of them, so who is it then? They whispered while Alon Palacio was still lost in his pastry. They say that upon hearing the name, the two of them were struck as if by lightning. Because the name those two nobles mentioned was Palacio. Alon Palacio dropped his piece of tart when he heard that. The leader of their group, he looked over there in bewilderment. Alon Palacio felt like he was going mad when he heard them say it. They said it was Count Palacio. He mentally reviewed his life up to this point. What nonsense are they talking? As for Duchess Althea, I only met her once when she was a young lady. And Miss Zenonia I've only met a few times. Alon Palacio held his head in frustration. He hadn't even met the current Count Zenonia. How could such a ridiculous rumor spread? It's obviously just idle gossip. Just then someone else ran up calling for Count Palacio. Alon Palacio wearily wondered why so many people were approaching him today. It's making him uneasy. The noble approached to speak. "I am Cayman, third son of the Comalan ducal family of the kingdom of Ashutalan. An honor to meet you, sir." He somewhat understood. At a grand ceremony like this nobles from allied nations attend too. "Yes, pleased to meet you, I am Count Palacio." Cayman suddenly went berserk at Alon Palacio. "I heard you only became a count by luck. I'm so jealous I want to see if you have any special secret." At this point he was a bit irritated and scolded inwardly. Goodness, even taro cone pastries can talk these days. Conveniently, other nobles came over to confront the fool Cayman. "What did you just say?" They defended Alon Palacio. "Are you insulting the nobles of our kingdom of Asteria?" Cayman nervously tried to explain. "No, that's not it. What is this? Isn't that just a harmless punching bag to vent on?" This idiot will now introduce himself. "I am Cayman Comalan, a romantic and refined gentleman. I traveled far to come here to marry the youngest daughter of the Lauder ducal family. Would my fiancé like to try the exquisite tart I've brought?" What woman in this world is perfect in every way? Cayman, with his fiancé beside him, glanced at the two young ladies passing by. HMPH, he immediately switched to judgmental mode. "That young lady ought to pay attention to her figure, right?" Cayman babbled beside the Lauder lady. "Who is that young lady with a slightly upturned nose?" Then he turned to flatter his fiancé. "Fortunately, Miss Lauder truly resembles her mother and is very beautiful. Now was the time to flirt." "Miss Lauder refused our engagement proposal. I must reconsider," she said. Cayman panicked. "What?" He sat there calling after the lady. "Miss Lauder, for some reason the engagement between me and Miss Lauder has been broken." Enraged, Cayman stormed into the main banquet hall. "I traveled all this way, it's truly infuriating." Just then, Cayman saw Alon Palacio standing there nibbling a pastry alone. Cayman appraised Alon Palacio, black hair and a cold face. "Is that the one, Count Palacio?" "HMPH, I hear he's just a lucky kid who knows nothing and has no backing." He regarded him as something easy to bully, truly an ideal target for venting his anger. With the flashback over, the nobles, barons, and counts asked Cayman, "Didn't you bring your courtly etiquette? The Kingdom of Austria is one of our long-standing allies." Cayman stammered like a small mouse. "No sir, it's because..." Alon Palacio watched this scene and could only sigh in helplessness. How unlucky must one be to draw all three of them out like this? And why does this united noble pressure feel so familiar? Seeing Cayman Comalan bowing and cry out, "I'm sorry, sir." The three top nobles, stern as officers, rebuked him. Hey, do you think saying sorry finishes everything?" He trembled as he accepted their punishment and cried out, "I said I'm sorry, but you men still won't forgive me. I'm asking if saying sorry is enough." Alon Palacio finally remembered what it reminded him of: military service. Cayman broke into sobs and fled while weeping, hiccuping that he had committed a great disrespect and deserved to die. Duke Lauder, Marquis Mardanio, and Count Balin approached him and asked if Count Palacio was all right. He waved his hand anxiously and replied, "I'm fine." Later, Alon Palacio kept it to himself. "But why is everyone acting like this today? I'm beginning to feel frightened." From what he observed, they had already started to move. That meant the rumor was true. And if Althea and Zenonia seriously entered the political arena, then Palacio's power as their leader would be enormous. Alon Palacio wondered if it was because of that rumor. If it kept escalating like this, it would cause big trouble, so it would be better to clarify that it was only a rumor. Marquis Mardanio stepped forward to converse. "Come to think of it, I have never spoken with you, Count." Duke Lauder added, "You must be very busy." "I understand," Alon Palacio replied awkwardly. "Actually." Marquis Mardanio rubbed his hands and said, I've heard that lately Count Palacio has been busy researching magic. Coincidentally, I recently acquired some rather fine relics." He continued, "So I would like to gift you these sacred items that can store mana. What do you think?" Duke Lauder and Count Balin also stepped forward with offers. "What a coincidence, I prepared a gift as well. Count, please accept this token of our sincerity." Alon Palacio was dazzled and felt he must correct them that it was merely a rumor. But he couldn't resist the temptation, so he stayed silent and accepted 2 magical relics and 5 vials of mana recovery potions. Dawn at the Lauder ducal family's mansion. In the mansion's parlor, a mysterious woman asked Marquis Mardanio. "How did it go?" He replied. "Fortunately, he accepted happily." Small gifts among nobles are mere social formalities, but rare items like sacred relics carry a different significance. Those who wish to join a faction and present precious items to the leader. That means, the woman said, as long as he is willing to accept, we're pleased. Marquis Mardanio laughed out loud. It's all thanks to the generosity of Duchess Althea. She raised her hand excitedly and said, "Welcome, Marquis Mardanio." The Duchess smiled. Althea cheerfully declared, "From now on we are officially on the same side." He replied that this was indeed a tremendous honor. Everyone was ready to agree. He thought inwardly that Duchess Althea had always been reserved and rarely appeared, yet this time she personally came and chose to meet only a few individuals. She had very likely already selected the pieces she needed, using money and influence subtly to bypass formal protocols. Although the rumors seemed to arise randomly with unclear origins, in reality this was a very deliberate political move. The opportunity lay before us, we must seize it. At that moment Duchess Althea spoke up, breaking the silence. "Then it's time for us to take action. This is the 4th day since the banquet began. For some reason, the number of gifts keeps increasing day by day. It's definitely because of those silly rumors about my relationship with Althea and Zenonia that they're all scrambling to curry favor like this." A sly gleam crossed his face. Since he'd already accepted them, they probably wouldn't ask for them back, right? Gather them up and find a way to slip away out of sight. But then a voice from behind made him startle, even spoke up, "My Lord Count." Seeing him startled, the young man was a bit puzzled. "Why do you look so alarmed? I'm back." Alon breathed a small sigh of relief. "I was just lost in a few thoughts." After that, the two of them returned to their rooms. Hearing Evan's news made him jump, and he blurted out, "To the north. Has the Dark God really manifested in the northern region?" He replied, "Yes, the situation in Caliburn is extremely chaotic. Based on ancient documents, Metis may also be connected to this evil force." He rubbed his chin in frustration and asked, "What about the additional information I requested?" He answered, "The person you're looking for is currently residing in that village, located in the north of the kingdom of Ashutalin." This made him nod in satisfaction. "Good, stop by there on the way. We'll set out for Caliburn immediately." This sudden decision startled Even. "Why such haste? Why must the destination be Caliburn? Are you really decided to go north?" He replied, "We'll discuss the specific details more thoroughly on the road. Prepare to depart right now." The young man nodded in acknowledgement. "Understood." After Even left, Alon leaned back in his chair, holding his head in despair. "Honestly, I don't want anything to happen on this side. These are entities of catastrophic scale comparable to the 5 great sins, the dark gods. Because of the influence of the spiritual crystallizations, you can't predict which dark god will borrow a mortal form to descend here. That's why I've been gathering information and trying to intervene early. I didn't expect things to escalate this quickly. From experience with games and witnessing hundreds of possible scenarios, the outcome for this world has formed very clearly in my mind. The alliance between kingdoms will crack and then completely collapse, leading to a pointless war over lands corrupted by otherworldly power and ending in annihilation. If that happens, my current life will vanish in an instant. Although I've devised contingency plans, after the Dark God descends, there will be a temporary calm lasting a few months before he fully awakens and becomes a resident deity. During that transition, the power in the form of the divine soul hasn't yet reached perfection. Seizing the opportunity at that time is probably the most viable option. Although nothing is certain, we must take a gamble. Because this is the only path left. I wonder what that child would like. Cut to 1 week later, someone ran in to report Sir Captain. He took the letter and began to examine it. And suddenly his eyes showed a hint of astonishment. He immediately called the deputy captain. The other replied, "Yes. You order me to send word that the plan to advance north this time will be postponed for another 2 weeks. On the fields near the village of Parkurun in the northern kingdom of Ashutalin." He was already here. His eyes were a little dazed, thinking to himself that it was surprising to meet him at this moment. A boy stepped forward before the two of them and said, "Hello, sir." He kept thinking that the boy truly had a striking appearance. This boy was Eliban, the protagonist of the RPG psychedelia that players embody. In any case, the protagonist's aura is something distinctly different. This face was exactly like what he'd seen in the game. Is that really a young boy? In person, he was truly extraordinary. He looked down at the boy and asked, "Do you know who I am?" The boy scratched his head and replied, "No, sir, I'm just very excited to meet strangers for the first time. My name is Eliban." Watching the boy, he continued to wonder how different this real world would be from the game. The concept of a protagonist really doesn't change. Sooner or later, the boy would become renowned and possess power far surpassing the character he once controlled. Standing before the character he once guided felt very strange. Recovering from the thought, he said, "What a bright, exceedingly polite boy." Then he produced a small pouch and placed it in the boy's hand. "Here, take this." The boy opened the pouch and found a gold coin and asked, "Oh, this is money, isn't it?" He ignored the boy and turned to call Even. Even immediately took out a suitcase, opened it, revealing several vials of mana inside. This left the boy utterly astonished. Then Even pulled out countless more gift boxes, and in an instant the gifts were piled into a mountain behind them. Pointing back, he confidently declared, "All of this now belongs to you." The boy's eyes grew wide. All of this is really mine." He then asked, "Why are you suddenly giving me so much money?" He answered, "Consider it an investment." He thought to himself that he'd equipped everything the protagonist would need for the early growth phase. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and said decisively, "Because in the future you will certainly become someone greater than this." He continued thinking that the boy should grow quickly and clean up those dark gods for him. Then he moved to leave, thinking this was a thoughtful act. At least material gifts can win people's hearts. He suddenly turned back and introduced himself. Forgive me for the late introduction. I am Count Palatio, remember this name well. I am the benefactor supporting you toward future success. The boy hurriedly chased after him. Thank you, sir. Oh no, my lord Count, I will surely engrave this favor in my heart. Sitting in the carriage, he looked out and pondered. Was the boy always this energetic? A dark fantasy game shouldn't really have such a bright atmosphere. Beside him even said, My lord Count, I roughly understand what you're doing, but is it okay to leave like this without explaining everything clearly? He replied. He's a smart child, he'll understand on his own. He continued thinking that the current situation directly involved lives and was urgent, so they couldn't linger to farm favor points. To be safe, I even activated automatic progression for the protagonist. Pay to power really is strong. Even assessed that in any case, the child seemed to possess innate talent. Dense mana surged within him, completely at odds with his modest clothing. It seemed he was carrying some kind of wondrous relic. He added, even I can sense that flow of magic. He drifted into thought again, nodding that before the journey begins, the character should only have basic stats, yet look. This is definitely another divergence from the original game. Perhaps it's the result of an unpredictable butterfly effect. For a protagonist, this change is even more pronounced. But whatever, so long as my plan to enjoy a peaceful life isn't affected. He replied, the stronger he becomes, the more it benefits me. This investment will surely pay off. After all, Eleben is one of the rare people with a kind heart in this brutal world, so there should be nothing to worry about. Hold on, a kind heart. He turned to Ivan and asked about it. That name Deus, would he agree to meet me? He thought to himself that Deus was so fearful he had never once set foot in the orphanage. He hadn't expected things to come to this. Ivan replied, I think he'll agree to meet you. He sighed, perhaps so then. Alon replied uncertainly, implying it might happen, showing the quiet sorrow of a young reincarnate. After that exchange, Alon went into the room and checked all his belongings. Evan noticed the mess and expressed disbelief at why Alan had bought so many miscellaneous items. Alan calmly explained that these items were bribes for the person who would save him in the future. 10 days later, the journey reached the capital, Caliburn. Kedum, the massive northern gate of Kedum, appeared before them, majestic and orderly, marking the end of a long road. As the carriage continued forward, Evan grew increasingly weary from the constant travel. Boredom and exhaustion seeped into him, and he frankly voiced his extreme fatigue. Alon, equally tired but composed, remarked that long journeys are inherently tiring and unavoidable. Evan, still trying to overcome his disappointment, reflected on how the final stretch had been worsened by the strange maze they had to pass through, feeling that without it he might at least keep some pride about their arrival. Alon calmly accepted the hardship, understanding there was nothing to be done to change it. As the carriage rolled on, Alon gently held the necklace in his hand and sank into thought. He recalled their travels from place to place, preparing for the coming battle against the gods beyond, accumulating strength and gathering gifts along the way. His thoughts turned to Deus, wondering if those efforts would be enough to please him. A father's heart rose within him, a man who wanted to give without hesitation or reserve. As the city gate drew nearer, Evan realized it would soon be their turn to be inspected. Shortly after, Evan stepped down from the carriage and moved forward to undergo the capital's check, expecting the process to end with a simple identity verification. He reassured Alon he would be back soon. Alon, still appearing relaxed, waved goodbye and encouraged him to rest comfortably. Left alone, Alon sat comfortably in the carriage, allowing himself a brief rest, closing his eyes and feeling relieved that at least in this city things seemed to proceed quickly and efficiently. That calm did not last long. Evan quickly returned with a tense expression and urgently told Alon that a small problem had arisen. Alon wanted clarification, and Evan explained that they had been asked to step aside, although Alon's identity had been verified. It seemed something else was causing concern. He replied without seeming anxious. Alon stepped out of the carriage. At that moment, a knight approached from behind. The man wore a crooked, overconfident smile, raising an eyebrow as he neared. He recognized Alon immediately and confirmed whether he was Count Palatio. The knight introduced himself as Burin, claiming to be a direct disciple of Chief Knight Fiola, known as the Fourth Swordsman. With a smug look, Fiola stared at Alon. His smirking smile was provocative as tensions at the northern gate quietly escalated. A fleeting discomfort crossed Alon's mind when he noticed the unfamiliar name Fiola. He wondered what the name could even mean to him. Realizing he had no idea who Fiola was, he kept a cold, indifferent expression and openly questioned the situation, noting that Fiola even brought knights and demanding to know the purpose behind that display. Fiola calmly explained that a friend of his from the kingdom of Ashutalon had sent a message saying he was indebted to Alon. Alon immediately rejected that notion, saying nothing like that had ever happened between them. His discomfort deepened when a realization surfaced. He suspected that the so-called friend could only be the overly dramatic and unstable man Cayman. In a clearly exasperated tone, Alon asked if Fiola's friend was Cayman. Fiola replied with a malicious smile, raising an eyebrow as he confirmed that Alon had indeed thoroughly offended his friend. Inwardly, Fiola recalled his friend's angry words, remembering how Cayman said he had been utterly humiliated. Fiola silently vowed to avenge Count Palatio for that humiliation. The scene then cut back to the past, showing Cayman contacting Fiola through a magically created orb. Cayman appeared enraged and exhausted, seething as he described how Count Palacio had gravely wronged him. With the help of 3 other men, he called Alon a bastard and informed Fiola that the Count was heading to Caliburn, asking Fiola to attack him in vengeance. Cayman's expression darkened further as he slowly spread a confident smirk. He tempted Fiola by suggesting that if he truly wanted to improve his skills, he would need more deep chasm corpses to work with. The memory continued as Fiola laughed loudly, admitting he owed his friend a debt. He was determined that at least he would put on an impressive show to repay him. The memory continued as Fiola laughed loudly, admitting he owed his friend a debt. He was determined that at least he would put on an impressive show to repay him. At that moment, the knights accompanying Fiola suddenly acted. In unison, they drew their swords and quickly surrounded Evan and Alon. Steel flashed under the lights near the northern gate. A look of confusion appeared on both their faces as the situation escalated abruptly. Evan reacted instinctively, drawing his sword and taking a defensive stance beside Alon. Frustration welled up in Alon's mind as he assessed the situation. He bitterly thought that the brat had started this, run off, and now this mess had followed him here. He recognized clearly that it was revenge carried out through a friend. He found that behavior pathetic and cowardly. Fiola then drew his sword. He stepped forward and pointed the blade straight at Alon's chest, the corner of his mouth curling into a smug smile. He stated his demand plainly, insisting that if all valuable items inside the carriage were surrendered, he might consider showing mercy. He regarded this action as nothing more than a favor he had been asked to perform. Pride filled Fiola's mind as he maintained his confident smile. He believed he had nothing to lose in this situation. In his assessment, everything tipped in his favor. The odds of success leaned completely toward him. From his perspective, Alon was merely a minor noble from the kingdom of Asteria, someone with little influence in the alliance and no ties to Caliburn. Fiola had thoroughly investigated the matter. With that certainty, he believed there would be no consequences from his action. Alon clearly grew angry, irritated, and frustrated at Fiola's words, and a fleeting thought crossed his mind that like attracts like. He clenched his fist and a powerful, flame-like energy formed in his hand, aimed directly at Fiola. At the same time, Fiola lunged forward with a wild grin, charging straight at Alon. Alon remained calm as another thought flickered through his mind, believing that even if things got a little messy, his master would handle it. Before the clash occurred, someone suddenly appeared from behind and forcefully grabbed Fiola by the throat, stopping him mid-attack. Fiola screamed in pain, accompanied by a distinct sound of bone breaking. The person holding Fiola's throat then lifted him high into the air. In too much pain, Fiola moaned helplessly as his sword slipped from his hand and fell to the ground. The pain grew so intense that the veins on Fiola's face began to bulge conspicuously, and he gritted his teeth to endure it. The person holding Fiola by the throat kept him suspended in midair, while Fiola, filled with rage and pain, tried to figure out who this person was and who would dare to kill him. As the scene continued, it was revealed that the one gripping Fiola's throat was none other than Deus. Deus stated plainly that his identity was irrelevant at the moment, and instead condemned Fiola's actions, asserting that Fiola had no right to lay a hand on someone who had helped him. Fiola remained suspended in midair, moaning uncontrollably from the pain. Unfortunately, an important truth that Fiola completely failed to understand gradually surfaced. The truth was that Count Palatian had won a duel with Kier of the Snowfield. Thanks to that victory, Count Palatian earned the title of Master Unarmed Knight and became known as the benefactor of Deus Macallan. Deus suddenly released Fiola and hurled him to the ground. Fiola groaned in pain as Deus relentlessly kicked him without mercy. Deus grabbed Fiola's hair with a vice-like grip, holding him down. Keeping his cold, fatal gaze, Deus turned his attention to the surrounding knights and issued a clear warning. He said that if even one of them dared to move, the consequences would exceed their imagination. Deus unleashed a brutal kick straight into Fiola's chest. The blow was so powerful that blood spouted from Fiola's mouth as he was flung away. Alon watched the scene in astonishment, a realization forming in his mind as he recognized that knight. This was the present-day Deus. Deus then told Fiola plainly that he should be grateful to be in a situation where he could not be killed. Fiola struggled to stand after the earlier blows, barely able to move as he leaned against a tree to steady himself. Immediately, Deus stepped forward and drove his knee hard into Fiola's chest, sending him crashing into the tree again. Fiola's cheek swelled severely from Deus's kick, and Deus continued to attack him mercilessly, unleashing one punch after another and then more kicks without relent. Nearby, Evan remarked to Alon that his strike was quite impressive. Hearing that, Alon's mind returned to the moment Deus declared his wrath on anyone who dared lay hands on his benefactor. Alon suddenly realized that Deus had indeed called him a benefactor. He wondered how grateful Deus must have been when he was young. However, now that Deus had grown up, Alon thought he would not welcome someone he barely knew. He remembered that Deus had never even replied with a single word, which made him feel as if he had already received every deserved reward for raising a son. Alon told himself that Deus had truly matured, calling him a troublesome kid in his thoughts, yet also acknowledging his genuine growth. The impression became clear, marked as 52% certain that one could easily recognize who had sponsored Deus because he had developed remarkably. Alon realized that Deus had grown into an extraordinarily upright young man. With that realization, Alon reflected on the feeling of seeing a well-raised son, and he felt a deep pride as a father. A powerful impact reverberated through the scene. Evan then teasingly pointed out to Alon that he knew his son was beating someone mercilessly. Alon replied plainly that he hadn't heard. Deep down, Alon understood that Deus acted that way because his father had been insulted in a foreign land. As that thought settled in, the scene showed Deus continuing to kick Fiola ruthlessly without any restraint. Another thought suddenly popped into Alon's head as he wondered why his son could be so annoyingly sweet. Soon after, Fiola was beaten savagely, repeatedly struck until he lost consciousness. Even then, Alon couldn't help but think it still seemed a bit excessive. At that moment, another realization suddenly occurred to Alon, reminding him once again that Deus was one of the 5 great sins. As the situation changed, Deus turned and stepped toward Alon. Then he stopped in front of him, bowed respectfully, and smiled confidently as he said he would escort him. At this, the remaining knights were utterly shocked by what they had witnessed. The scene opened on an icy land where a brutal battle had taken place. Corpses lay scattered across the battlefield, their frozen forms covering the ground. Some bodies were engulfed in flames as the opposing side burned them mercilessly. Amid that desolate landscape, Delman, bearer of Caliburn's 3rd sword and commander of the deep red flame, stood towering. Overflowing with victory, he raised his sword high, celebrating the outcome of the battle. Delman shouted, "One of the 8 chieftains, the great Culkin, along with his entire tribe, has been annihilated. The Deep Red Flame Knights have claimed victory on the kingdom's land." Hearing that proclamation, all the Deep Red Flame Knights erupted in joy. They cheered loudly, danced, and celebrated the hard-won victory they had achieved. After letting the celebration die down, Delman said, "Return to the outpost and begin preparations." The knights responded in unison, "Yes, Captain." As they began to move, Delman's expression hardened. In his mind, he reflected on his achievements, believing that after accomplishing something so significant, he should no longer be bullied by the newly appointed Master Knight. His anger deepened as he gritted his teeth. Delman thought that even if that man used shady tricks others didn't know, he still knew the truth. Caliburn and the Savages had a long-standing conflict, a war governed by mutual honor and unwritten rules. But this time, things were different. Culkin had been deceived. He was lured out alone and destroyed by a covert force. Delman recalled how Culkin's great knights were slaughtered and how truly unjust the entire campaign had been. By exploiting the momentum of the battle, the tribe was wiped out completely. Delman muttered, "That bastard." He remembered that the very man had sent him a victory report claiming to have defeated Kurga of the Snowfield. It all happened because Delman demanded a decisive result from the expedition. Culkin's body had vanished in the chaos of battle. Even if he had survived, the poison would have ensured his death. Finally, Delman convinced himself there was nothing left to do but return to Caliburn and report the mission's success. A crooked smile appeared on his face as he stepped forward. But then he suddenly stopped. From afar, he noticed a man standing motionless near the forward base. Confusion flickered across Delman's face. The man slowly turned toward him. The man spoke. Filled with rage, Delman gritted his teeth and swung his sword. Flames erupted from the blade, blazing fiercely. A strange unease crept along Delman's spine. Delman thought Culkin should be dead. On closer inspection, an overwhelming aura began to rise from Culkin's body. In Culkin's shadow, Delman saw the shape of a demon forming. Culkin said, "You have insulted a sacred duel, a duel that should have been fought with honor." Horror radiated from his presence. Even superhumans capable of ending hundreds of lives could be devoured by this being. Cold sweat ran down Delman's face. Delman realized this is not Culkin. Driven by desperation, Delman launched another attack. Fire surged wildly from his sword. The man dodged easily and said, "Answer me first." Without hesitation, Delman attacked again, unleashing even greater flames. Once more, the man easily evaded his pursuit. Delman thought bitterly to himself, believing in battlefield duels is foolish. The fire scorched the ground, melting the ice around them. The man stared at him with a deadly gaze. The man said, "You are strong for a human. I will give you one last chance. Fight me." Sensing the danger, Delman shouted, "Prepare to fight." The knights surrounded the man from all sides. The man smirked, magic concentrated in both his hands. The man said, "A mortal without honor does not deserve a glorious death. There will be no duel between me and a savage like you." From his hands, poisonous magic erupted and spread into the fallen knights' bodies. The poison infected every corpse. The knights began to scream in unbearable agony. Their eyes turned blood red. As their bodies collapsed, some knights cried out, "Kill us, please end this." As their bodies fell, some knights shouted, "Kill us, please end this." As their screams faded, the man stepped forward. He tore Delman's throat with his bare hand. Immediately after, he struck the ice block, causing a massive explosion. The remaining knights were hurled into the air and slammed to the ground. Blood spread across the sky like a gloomy mist. Then the man unleashed a brutal punch. His fist drove straight through Delman's chest. Blood spurted from Delman's mouth. Delman whispered weakly, "Is there any other choice?" He collapsed to the ground, trembling in pain. Delman cried, "It hurts. Kill me, please kill me." Moments later, Delman died. As life faded, the man's eyes turned blood red. The man said, "Savages, you are all creatures made from death, robbed of your rightful passing." The fallen knights began to rise, surrounding the remaining red-clad knights. Panic spread through their ranks. The man declared, "The blood arena is now open." Suddenly, a terrifying presence descended. Ultaltis appeared with a sneer. Althus proclaimed, "I am the god of all savages, the father of duels. I will personally grant you an honorable death. If you claim not to be savages, prove it in a duel." Blood began to rain down from the sky. The scene then shifted away from the battlefield. Deus bowed respectfully. Deus said, "I will take you there, Count Alon." The surrounding knights stood stunned in astonishment. The narration explained that in Caliburn, the prestige of Duke Deus Massilian, who needs no sword, was sky high. He had once defeated the second prince and showed deference to no one except the king. Alan observed him carefully. The knights wondered what kind of man is Count Palatian to be so respected. The surrounding knights looked at Alan in disbelief. One knight whispered, "Who is he?" Deo summoned a luxurious carriage. Deo said, "Please take a seat inside." Alan felt weighed down by the excessive attention. Evan quietly said, "You go ahead, Alan, I'll follow behind." Before long, Alan had arrived at Deus's mansion. Stepping out of the carriage, he saw a massive, radiant structure that resembled a giant crab-shaped fortress. Inside, silence enveloped the mansion. Alan thought technically arriving here is a success. I obtained the Kim Dong Dong, but something feels off. After careful thought, Alan decided to be honest. Alan said, "I would like to speak with you for a moment. I came here with a purpose. I have a favor to ask." Deus looked surprised. Deus said, "You have come to ask me a favor. Please explain." Alan nodded. Alan said, "I will explain everything clearly." Deus replied immediately. Deus said, "Assisting you would be my honor." Inwardly, he realized this was not a command but a request. Deus then said, "Let's sit down and talk properly." They sat at the tea table. Silence filled the room. Alan thought, shouldn't the host sit at the head of the table? Despite some awkwardness, he felt strangely at ease. After a period of silence, Alan spoke again. Alan said, "I have two requests. I know they may not be easy to accept." He continued, "I must go north and I want you to come with me." Deus gave a slight smile. Deus said, "I would be glad to go with you." Alan felt uncertain, then Deus revealed a surprise. Deus said, "I have already planned an expedition to the north." Relief appeared on Alan's face, but then he continued. Alan said, "The second request concerns the royal treasury of Caliburn." The atmosphere grew heavy. Alan said, "I wish to borrow an artifact." He looked straight at Deus. Alan said, "May I borrow the madman's ring?"